We are live. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Break the Rules stream. I am your host, Lev Polyakov, at LevPo on Twitter, coming at you all the way live. We got my main man, Giovanni Pennacchietti, joining
Assalamu
us.
alaikum. God
And
wills it.
God wills the fact that we are here right now with the amazing, the wonderful Max Derrat, an amazing, prolific YouTuber, bringing in all of the different genres and mediums, whether we're talking about video games, whether we're talking about movies, and getting deep into the nitty-gritty of what exactly is going on with them in relation to the bigger questions that I think a lot more people, especially that we're locked in, are asking themselves on a daily basis. Why are we here? What is this about? Is there more to this existence than just the average drudgery and all the demoralizing things we see every day? So, Max, I want to thank you so much for coming in here. Number one, on such short notice. Number two, for the fact that you are, from what I saw of all your streams, you say stay yellow, and this is why I am staying yellow for this stream. Gio, you are not aware of it, but I'm actually yellow right
Oh,
now
God.
during the live stream,
You,
and I've
you
got
just had to
sneak.
put the sneed behind you. You just had
Of
to
course,
do it.
of
My
course, that's
God.
the way it works. So everybody, don't forget to subscribe, patreon.com/breaktherules, and we are going to get started with Max. Max, please tell us, number one, why did you start doing what you're doing? And number two, do you notice, psychologically speaking, a difference in your audience, in the various discussions that are going on online from where you started to now? Go for it.
Okay. Well, first of all, Geo, one of us. One of
The
us.
bus. One.
Yes. Come on. It's the yellow trade is where you'll be more mellow. So to answer the first question, why did I start doing what I did? Well, it wasn't actually intentional. As you just pointed out, I talk about video games predominantly, and I try to link them to bigger philosophical, psychological themes that run throughout art, just to partially to demonstrate how video games can be considered high art a few decades into video games being around in the public consciousness. Um, but yeah, the reason why I started talking about them was completely by accident. Back in 2016, there was this video game that came out called Inside. It's made by the same people that did another game called Limbo. Some of you might have heard of it. And the game is only like 3 hours long, but it tells this wonderful, wonderful story without without there being any dialogue. It's told entirely visually. And the way it does it, though, it just every single thing that you look at is so latent with meaning, and it's trying to tell you something not just about the way that the world works, but about uh, like the overall message that it's trying to communicate. And so I figured, I'm trying to figure out new stuff to talk about on my channel. Why not try video game analysis for once? So I tried to explain what I thought was going on with the game and put out the video. And lo and behold, over the course of a few months, it manages to garner over 1 million views. And I was like, maybe I have a knack for this sort of thing. And so over the years that followed, I sort of made my way from talking more so about politics, which is what I predominantly talked about ever since I started my YouTube channel in 2015 into 2016. But then I sort of made the decision, you know what? I want to be defined by stuff that I love rather than by stuff that I hate, which is what politics is mostly about anyways. And then ever since then, it's been me talking about video games and trying to talk about some of the brilliant things that you can derive from that medium and, lore analysis and all that. And then slowly over the last few years, mental health has sort of been a side thing along with that. So both of those. And then second question, you asked about my audience. I often say that my audience is the best in the world. And the reason why is because one, they are highly intelligent, and they're two, they're awfully, awfully kind. I have yet to engage with somebody in my audience that isn't an obvious troll, where they aren't as intellectually curious as I am. And it's so much fun just being able to interact with each and every one of them. And they oftentimes, they're the ones that spawn the ideas that I have for new videos on my channel, like the new games that I cover, the new mental health topics that I discuss openly. It's because they're the ones that are sort of guiding me on this journey towards these new heights, giving me inspiration all the time just because they're all so smart. So it's wonderful. You wouldn't ever think that YouTube, especially YouTube comment sections, would be a place for people to engage in civil and constructive debate, but I think that's what's happening with me, and hooray.
Do you find that the audience of more, let's say, politically leaning channels tends to fester over time, regardless of which part of the political spectrum you're in, where either people would close themselves off into bubbles, or they would just get very mad at all the problems in the world that they're seeing? And would you say that then you've been able to avoid that by not really going at political themes? Or if you were to talk more about politics, do you think you'd still be able to avoid that from happening?
That's a very good question, and it's a question that I'm actually going to attempt to answer. So, for example, are you familiar with the video game franchise called The Last of Us?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, God, yeah.
Spawned many memes, the sequel, as you know.
So the sequel, so as you're aware, that sequel was particularly, let's just say it wasn't well received by a wide contingent of amount of people. And, I happen to agree with a lot of the criticisms that are made of the game, but I will say that I don't think it's the absolute bag of garbage that other people make it out to be. And because of sort of the huge hubbub surrounding that game, the large amount of people that loved it, and then an seemingly equal amount of people that hate it, I was always intrigued, what would it be like if I were able to try and analyze this game objectively? What if I took the best arguments from both sides and tried to weed out the merits in both sides' arguments and tried to promote more, not entirely objective, because you can't be entirely objective when it comes to art, but something approaching that. And I'm going to be doing that very soon in regards to The Last of Us Part 2 when I do that analysis. And that'll be sort of my first foray into that. But as far as whether or not people be responsive to it, we'll have to see. But to answer the first question that you asked, I have been avoiding it because, as you sort of aptly suggested, people who talk about politics on YouTube, they, over a certain period of time, they might say towards the beginning that, we're going to try and promote as many different voices as we can and try to just engage with a whole bunch of different ideas. But after a while, sorry?
That's what BTR is doing in a way. I mean,
Right.
It's really weird, though. I understand what you're talking about here. We do try to get like very random assortments. So we would have a somebody who worked for Pete Buttigieg's campaign, shout out to Jessica DeLoach, coming in with Zero HP Lovecraft, who is a famous Twitter writer. You couldn't find more opposites if you tried. And the very fact that we have like anonymous Twitter people talking with professional people, it's something that's not really seen. But I do notice that there is a bit of anger that starts coming out. Yeah. And I want to actually direct the question to Gio. So, Gio, I don't know how familiar you are with The Last of Us Part 2, but in general, let's say the wokeness, for lack of a better word, of video games that you're seeing today, what would you say would be the existential threat that you or other people may be seeing coming from the way that video games and movies today are being portrayed? Because there are some people who would say, like, this is on its way out. There was a recent article written in Unheard that talked about how plenty of, let's say, liberals, classic liberals, whatever you want to say, are standing up against this woke stuff already, so it's not as dreary as people who, let's say, want to make money off of the doom and gloom make it out to be. So, I don't know, Gio, what is your take on the existential fear that people have when it comes to this stuff?
I think, like, the problem is, from my understanding, and yet this is the only yellow I could find, by the way. I mean, maybe when I get my new computer, I'm going to have the ability to do the background like you have, Lev. But no, the problem is the framing, I think, of the way a lot of these like culture conf issues manifest themselves. The framing is like, well, on the one end, it's like we need representation, and representation is like this reified property that must be like a quantitative thing. On the other end, you have like the typical like IDW response, like the Sargon of Akkad live stream shit of like, the woke people are taking over all media. And And it is true to the extent that like this is the cultural influence that, Zoomers and whoever are predominantly getting. I mean, the line between playing The Last of Us 2 and, I don't know, like sitting down for 5 hours and watching Hassan Piker on Twitch instead of watching Break the Rules for 5 hours.
Which you should be.
Yeah, exactly. I think like the problem is the framing itself. I think that first of all, it's the assumption that representation as a mere quantitative property is something that is influential to begin with. That's the big problem. And the other problem is that the way you go about it, it's kind of hard because you're dealing with a lot of like institutional forces that have like, I mean, having known people that are in the quote unquote industry, as you know, Lev, obviously, I mean, you started off with Newgrounds, my God, right? Like, it's very difficult because...
Gio, I didn't start out on Newgrounds. I started out in the New York independent animation circuit.
Yeah, then you migrate. Yeah.
Yeah.
But even worse, that's even more of an indictment. Because they select for certain people, and certain people have proclivities towards, what would you call it? I mean, woke is such an overplayed word. Let's call it just transnational progressive type of ideology. So it's you're almost trying to fight very, very intangible cultural issues through like a legislative framework. So that's the problem right there. And the problem, I think, is that even the criticism of it, it's the way that the news cycle works is that you'll have like a controversy like The Last of Us 2, which is totally by every definition is ridiculous, right? But at least from my perspective. Then you'll have the response to it, but then the response will get memed on, they'll get played out, and then nobody will care after. Then it'll become some other video game or it'll be like Little Nos, right? I mean, I feel bad because like every time something happens, BTR has a stream about it where we have very high-minded theories, but I just think, I can't help but think that all of these are just eidolons, all of these are just distractions. Not in the sense that they don't matter, they do matter, but the fundamental ways in which culture is dispersed through like a culture industry model, I think people have to realize that the whole system itself is like bankrupt. And to just say, well, we're going to have like trans women of color become a lead in a video game, or the other side, we're going to have LA-based, like what would you even say? Like because what do they want, right? Do you want like LA-based fashy character that's gonna like, I don't know, you're gonna have like it's just that's the whole problem is that the way that culture is even created is especially with video games. And I wanted to get into this with Max. I wanted to have a little back and forth about even the validity of video games as an art form, which I'm controversially I've talked about.
But before that, I'm curious if Max, if you could touch on what Gio was just talking about right now.
Well, about fundamental issues versus micro issues is what I think you're getting at, right?
Yeah. Even just like the framework of like whether or not representation in itself, like as a property, whether that's a big issue, right?
Well, I think as far as representation goes, I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the way that you go about trying to put it in there. I think the less big of a deal that you make it, the less big of a deal that it will become. And then people won't make a big deal out of the fact that, that Shang-Chi movie that's coming out at the end of the week. Oh, it's like all Asian cast. It's like, great. I was going to go see it anyways, regardless of whether or not there are Asians in it. So it's not something that I think should be at the forefront of everybody's mind, like the way that society is trying to make it right now. Because I think when you do that, over time, all people are going to be doing is just being more and more consciously aware of people's race and trying to make that a paramount issue when it's not. It's just going to make people more racist. But with that said, it's still good to try and offer as many opportunities as you can to people, as long as they get it on the basis of merit.
Well, I guess this comes down to, and I want Gio to touch on the video game question, but this also comes down to what you were talking earlier about in some of your videos, having to do with how much do we have ideas versus the ideas having us. How much do a lot of these identities that people adopt over time How much are they based on the advertising that they've seen over and over again? And what does that talk about in relation to whether it's the dog that's wagging the tail or the tail wagging the dog here? What exact things do we put out there, and should we have a certain, let's say, a certain moral structure or something that would dictate, like, this is something we should encourage more, like we should encourage family and all that kind of stuff, and this is what we should encourage less. And if there is somebody who happens to have a certain identity that does not fit in to what we encourage, we're not going to stop that. But at the same time, it's not like this is going to be the popular thing for people who want to be accepted, just pushing themselves into.
Who are you addressing that to?
I would address that to you, Max, and if Gio, if you have any comments on that as well, I would love to hear it.
Okay, so it's tricky, right? Because especially with the internet and people's attention spans in the internet age, their attention can be flocking to a whole bunch of different things at once. And while it might be nice to say that it's good to have a wide variety of things to look at so that, you can have as much information that you can and then come to your own rational evidence-based decisions regarding a wide variety of topics. But the problem is not as many people have that intellectual capacity, unfortunately. So with that said, it might be useful to try and have some sort of a body determining what sorts of messages should be put out there, so that way people don't get confused and just gravitate to what they like most because of the way it satisfies their biases or their emotional impulses. But the problem is, it's like, how do you determine what that body would be, and how do you prevent them from being biased?
We could set up an artificial intelligence apparatus in the form of a sometimes
Lev, we need a ministry.
Sometimes skull revealing military people.
We need a Ministry of Propaganda and Public Enlightenment. If you get that reference, Lev.
No, what's that reference? No.
Ministry of Propaganda and Public Enlightenment.
Well,
Joseph Goebbels, that was his title.
Oh, okay, yeah, there we
go. Oh.
Well, that does speak to the fear that people have when it comes to retainment over access to information. But that was like one of the most fascinating videos I've seen in a long time, the one that you did, Max, about the artificial intelligence inside of Metal Gear Solid. Mm-hmm. And, well, I am curious, why do you think that they were showing their skulls in some of the images there?
Because the mask was coming off.
There you go. And then it's death. It's Thanatos at the end. Yeah.
So, did you sort of want to talk about that and the possibility of something like that coming
Absolutely.
Okay. So first of all, just in regards to that video, in case you guys don't know, there's this video game series called Metal Gear Solid, and it's my all-time favorite entertainment franchise. It's the air that I breathe. It's the blood that runs through my veins. It's like Metal Gear Solid for me is what Star Wars is for a lot of people. So Metal Gear Solid 2, there's this moment that happens towards the end of the game that a friend of mine named Steve, he did a video on that was also called The Most Profound Moment in Gaming History. And I was so influenced by that video. It's thanks to that video that I actually have a YouTube channel, that I wanted to do gaming analysis. And then after a while, I thought, you know what, there's some things that, as much as I love Steve, I think there's a few things that I could add on top of that. So I put out that video, and it has to do with the ending of that game. And how do I explain this for people that aren't very familiar with the Metal Gear Solid story in a way that they can understand? So throughout the game, you're a secret agent, and you're trying to stop a bunch of terrorists from launching a nuclear strike, right? And you're being commanded by your commanding officer, who we think is the commanding officer known as Colonel Campbell from the first game. And he's telling you to do all this stuff to prevent the terrorists from doing what they're going to do. But over the course of the game, you start to realize, things aren't necessarily adding up. The things that the Colonel is telling me to do, they don't really seem to be in accordance with the reality that I'm perceiving. People around me tend to be saying things that make me question what the kernel's doing. But because we want to be the secret agent, because we want to be like Solid Snake, who is the protagonist of the first game, you go along with it. So you're quote unquote following orders. And yeah, if anybody has any knowledge of history, the bad places that can lead you to. And the ending of that game is exactly one of those things. So at the end of the game, you find out that by following the orders of this Colonel Campbell, you realize that the Colonel that you thought was the Colonel from the first game isn't a Colonel, it's actually an AI. And they were testing to see how willing you would be to go along with orders that conflict with your perception of reality, as long as you can, live out a sort of fantasy of being this super soldier. And in doing that, you unintentionally enslave the world. And the reason why you enslave the world is because the AI has this computer program that they want to install into the internet, which would allow them to be able to filter out garbage information, things like fake news, misinformation, and preserve good news that will foster the evolution of the human race. And what was I about to say? Sorry, just give me 1 second. I lost my train of thought.
Everybody subscribe.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar, actually, when you lay it out like that, the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Go on.
Yeah, so they do that, and it was because of your compliance with the system that the AI was trying to figure out, well, if we were to put this into the internet, will people be willing to go along with this? And because of your participation in the experiment, they verified that the program would work, and you essentially enslaved the entire human race to the puppets of this AI. And so the AI will control the distribution of information throughout the internet. And it's interesting. The reason why it's profound is because this game, it came out in 2001, over a decade before this problem of fake news and misinformation reached public consciousness. And not only that, it provoked a great discussion among the people in my comment section. It's like, should we have an AI filtering through this information, or should we not? And I have my own opinions on that, but having laid this out, hopefully in a way that's comprehensible to everybody, I know that was a lot to take in. I'd like to, maybe hear what your thoughts are on that.
Well, do you know this one 8chan thread about what was it called? Most of the internet is fake. Do you know that one?
I know, but it's a statement that I agree with.
Yeah, like it lays out how it was basically like the export on 8chan, which is even more disturbing than the one on 4chan. Essentially, when you take all of the sort of what they call the surface web, and you realize how much like corporations, advertising, the filtering of information, how information gets slotted into certain parameters, a lot of that is generated basically by AI programs that Silicon Valley nerds like have started to perfect over the years. And so their claim is that actually the vast majority of things that you see, even now with the GANs and GTP, what's that called? GPT-3? It's like the automatic generated language thing. GPT, sorry. Basically with that, now that they can create AI news articles, the vast majority of what you do actually see in the surface web, they claim, keep in mind these are paranoiacs from 8chan export, that actually the vast majority of the surface web is actually I keep saying actually, is being generated in sort of post-human means, if you will. It's out of the hands of a physical programmer or a physical Janny moderator. It's more so that they're selecting, even the omission of information is by and large becoming more generated by AI programs that can, for example, detect certain words. I mean, very primitive stuff so far, but imagine if they get, which they're trying to, I think Zuckerface, sorry, that's a Bronze Age pervert reference. Modern Zuckerface, he's doing this research where you can, kind of similar to the Chinese, where not only they censor like text before they show up on Facebook, but like they can even generate on your behalf certain things, like to prevent you from being banned, you'll have to like say certain things. Like it's really crazy.
Praise the leader.
Yeah.
I
Well,
know.
before we get to the point that we're not going to be able to say his name without the AI freaking out, although it probably will freak out, but he's been said enough times. So if you remember, there was that episode of Joe Rogan's podcast with Alex Jones, the great water filter merchant, who had the following to say about AI. Google believes the first AI will be a supercomputer based on the neuron activity of the hive mind. I'm not going to do the accent. Based on the neuron activity of the hive mind of humanity, with billions of people wired into the Internet of Things. And so all our thoughts go into it, and we are actually building a computer that has real neurons in real time that is also psychically connected to us, that are organic creatures. So they will have current projection powers, future prediction powers, a true crystal ball. But the big secret is, once you have the crystal ball and know the future, you can add stimuli beforehand and make decisions that control the future. And so then it's the end of consciousness and free will for individuals as we know it, and the true 2.0 in a very bad way. Hive mind consciousness with an AI jacked into everyone, knowing our hopes and dreams, delivering it to us, not into some PKD wirehead system. He's talking about Philip K. Dick, where we plug, where we plug in and give up unconsciousness because of unlimited pleasure, but because we were already wired in and absorbed before we knew it, by giving over our consciousness to the system, by our daily decisions that it was able to manipulate and control into a larger system. The devil, whatever you want to call this interdimensional thing that gives them advanced off-world technology, the fallen one that's not of this world, is giving them advanced knowledge on how to construct these systems that have already been used before on other populations. Okay, so, I mean, that already goes down the rabbit hole before we get to that part, which we will. Max, any thoughts on this prediction thing that the water filter merchant was just talking about?
Well, as far as science fiction ideas, it's clear that Alex Jones is quite well read up on them. And I have to agree, if things like cybernetic augmentation is going to happen, where we're able to fuse with machines a la Ghost in the Shell, I think the inevitable conclusion of that is that people are just going to be having their brains hooked up to the net in a way that sort of allows them to live the most ideal life, where they're just being injected with soma, a la Brave New World, all the time. And then people will just be so in love with that existence that they'll give over full control of their consciousness over to this hive mind. And then we'll be in something like the Matrix, and then Morpheus will be coming out to try and get us out of the system and rage against the machine.
But aren't we already in that state to a certain extent? The amount of time that people look over at their smartphones, it's as if this has become another organ that you can't really live without.
Oh yeah, we're getting there. It's just, this is sort of the nascent stages before we can actually start to fuse. And the smartphone is sort of the beginnings of that. So maybe sometime over the next 20 years, once bionic limbs and bionic eyes start to be perfected and be indistinguishable from the way that a normal human organic limb or organ functions, then the more that we progress in that direction, then we can do brains, then we can implant artificial brains with our organic brains, and then eventually we'll just be hooked up to the net, and then our individuality will be completely gone. But hopefully, there will be ethicists that are at the forefront of all these decisions, overlooking all this. But I don't know what Elon Musk said about AI, speaking of Joe Rogan, when he was on Joe Rogan talking about AI and saying that people aren't slowing down their approach to developing AI. I'm not feeling particularly optimistic.
I'm not feeling particularly optimistic either, except for one thing, which is this is something that I also wanted to discuss with, and whenever he's going to come to his senses and not be in the unfortunate state that he is in regarding his opinion on Catholics and other revealed religious-minded people, then we'd be able to talk. But so far, though, I would separate the ideas of Giorgiani as far as good ideas and bad ideas. So Jason Giorgiani is somebody who eventually we may have on the show, and he wrote a book talking about the spectral revolution. The idea that there have been multiple studies done that modern day, let's say, skeptics and scientific community people don't really like discussing, having to do with the psychic powers, having to do with being able to go into this, collective unconscious, whatever you want to say, and take certain information out of there. And I'm curious what based on the experiences that you've personally had, the things that you've read, Max, what is your stance on the collective unconscious, not just in the psychological sense, not just in the science fiction sense, but in the true sense of being something that we can tap into in a interconnected way?
That's a huge question, man. I get a lot of crap from people saying that I actually believe in the collective unconscious just because I read a lot of Jung. I don't. I read a lot of Jung just because I find him to be interesting. I think that he is always trying to think outside the box, and I just like that type of thinking, no matter where it goes, even if I agree or disagree with it. That's why when I read a book like Ion and he discusses astrology, I like reading about it, even though I don't necessarily agree with it. So, but as far as the collective unconscious goes, there are two possible outcomes that I can sort of foresee. One is that it's real and that Jung was onto something, and that consciousness and mind is sort of interwoven into the fabric of our universe. Or two, consciousness is an illusion that's just produced by random firings of neurons in our brain. I like to think that, given what I've read and the evidence that I've seen, that there is some sort of evidence for a collective unconscious. I think that we're creating our own material version of that with something like the internet, and that eventually, once like going back to what we were just talking about, once human beings are able to link up their brains with the net, that will sort of be the collective unconscious given material form.
But that is, to me, a bit of a disturbing thought if you're talking about technology being utilized for this. While I agree that it may be possible, I still find AI and technology like ones and zeros to have the potential to keep people within the closed loop, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So people only know and reference the things that are inside of their vocabulary. So we have different slangs, we have certain slangs and pronouns and hashtags on Twitter, for example, that people are used to. Same thing with memes. People are used to the certain language, just like you would have a tribe somewhere in the Southwest Indies that has their own mythology and their own language. And whenever they have like a ship come in or like an airplane, then you've seen those series of cargo cults where they would make the same ship out of straw, not really knowing what exactly it's supposed to do. So my fear here is that when we limit ourselves to just thinking about the possibilities in terms of what technology can we use to interface with, we may become trapped within another cycle. We may become trapped in technology. Would you give any credence to the idea that there may be, beyond just the collective unconscious as far as this concept, an existence? You could call it existing in the astral plane, you could call it the afterlife, heaven, whatever you want, that there can be an actual existence beyond our mortal bodies within the realm of thought, within the realm of ideas. And this is, let's say, more of this experience is more of a solidified experience. This is something that people like Rudolf Steiner have talked about, as well as other people, as well as Eastern religions, that this is like the solidification of thought, and this is what we're experiencing, but there's more beyond that.
It's something that I've given a lot of thought to, and Jung, oddly enough, even though I was just sort of saying that I was ambivalent about a lot of Jung's ideas, I do think that he was on to something when he pointed out two things in regards to the nature of consciousness and where we go after we die. One is that opposites are necessary in order for existence to be. And so I think that without death, there can't be life. And upon death, there has to be some sort of return to life. It's the cycle of nature. It's the yin and yang. And then the second thing was, what was the other thing I was going to, oh yeah. He said this at the end of Ion. He said that there can't be much difference between mind and matter, because how can mind exist without matter producing it? And matter cannot be completely different from mind, because how else can mind move matter? Or something like that. And with those two statements, it sort of suggests to me that upon death, there is some sort of transcendent existence that goes beyond current human comprehension. But obviously, without a way to sort of prove that on an objective level, it's hard to express full belief in it. You can only really go with sort of Jung and Freud and them trying to put forward their theories about things that you can't actually prove in regards to the nature of the afterlife. So that's as much sense as I've been able to make of it. I don't know if you guys were able to understand what I just said.
Yeah, like I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Sorry, did you want to say something? I said you want to say something young. My God, what the fuck?
That's a good sign. That means I'm on my way.
I have a longer point.
No. Okay, then I'm gonna say patreon.com/break the rules. Become a patron. Gio, go ahead, buddy.
I think that it's very interesting when Jung talk. I mean, it's funny how like certain academics have an odd deference for Jung as opposed to other ones, because in academia, especially with the development of existentialism, then later going on into phenomenology, Freud becomes very important. Ironically enough, even to feminists like Irigaray and other ones. But because when it comes to like the storehouse of ideational, largely appetitive contents within the unconscious, which you have in the Freudian model, Jung was much more favored by the later developments and, ironically enough, postmodernists such as Deleuze. There's only really one passage where, apart from the Francis Bacon book, where Deleuze goes into Jung, and that's in The Thousand Plateaus, and he's very favorable towards him. I remember when I was in grad school, my professor, he knew me, right? I was into Jung way before Jordan Peterson. He's like, well, you look at this passage. It was in the faciality passage. And I'm like, I was stunned because anti-Oedipus before, or what was it called? Schizophrenia, capitalism, schizophrenia. That was basically shredding Freud and the Oedipal complex as a limiting function. But it's interesting how when Jung approaches the question, whether it's in Civilization and Transition or other works, when he, for example, visited a lot of tribes in Africa, where did he go? I forget exactly where he went, which exact tribe. I think it was the Igbo tribe. He noticed how each manifestation of the archetypes, they are very rooted, which again, this is something that even Giorgiani had very much problem with in the one Jeffrey Mishlove interview. He had they're much more situational than people think. They're much more rooted within the particular instantiation of each culture and each tribe and even ethnicity. Jung even goes that far. And then later on, certain esoteric racists like Serrano would take that. But I think that we're getting ahead of ourselves, and I kind of want to save this for Uberboyo. But what we were saying before about AI, what was fascinating when I watched your video, this was like, God, a long time ago. Not a long time ago, but the Metal Gear Solid video that you did, Max. It's interesting how when the plot is that they want to select for information to aid in human evolution, but it's very much how shall I put it? They make the assumption that, and again, I think a lot of tech nerds make this assumption, unfortunately, because of their materialist thinking, that it's like a 1-to-1 scale of having quote unquote good information, equating proper choices, then equating human evolution in a sort of like an epiphenomenal way of like, well, if my surroundings in terms of the information ecology that I'm in, if that's good, if that can aid me, because the AI can of course predict which information can aid in human evolution, then therefore I can become this like, transition into an Ubermensch, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But what's interesting is that that's a very ancient debate. If you go to, for example, the Protagoras, Plato, he makes the same assumption. He says that proper information, given almost like as an input mechanism into the soul, will lead to better results, will lead to the growth of the human, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, later on, we know that that's kind of bullshit. That's like one take that Plato had. I mean, apart from his takes about the work of art, that he was kind of wrong about, at least in my opinion, because we know demonstrably that even if people do have good information,
They don't
it's
always
not
act in their best interest.
exactly. It's not like an AI. It's not like an algorithmic program that you can punch in certain sequences and it can spit out by and like more or less can spit out a result that you want it to. It's because people have good information all the time. You know that if I take heroin, my life is going to get destroyed, but we do it
Yeah.
anyways, right?
But to defend the AI system a little bit here, they want to get rid of a lot of noise too. And let's
Yeah.
face it,
Oh,
Gio,
that
there's
is
plenty
true.
of noise on the internet. So
Right, but here's the problem. How do you determine between what is noise and what isn't? And how do you know that the people that
Mm.
program the AI aren't just inputting their own biases that will ultimately result in the destruction of the human race? And if we go through with the canon of the Metal Gear Solid saga, that is exactly what almost happens in Metal Gear Solid 4, right?
Oh, is that the one with the plague where they got the girl, the woman that has the superpowers? Is that the one?
No, that's Metal Gear Solid 5.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that takes place like oh god, I feel like such a nerd right now. It takes place 3 decades before Metal Gear Solid 2. Metal Gear Solid 4 is the reality that occurs after the AI takes hold of the entire planet, and what ultimately happens is this huge war economy balloons across the world where people are constantly engaged in combat and just, I guess, sort of weeding themselves out. And it's something that one of the progenitors of the AI, a character named Big Boss, calls a colossal mistake on behalf of the AI. And that colossal mistake could happen, even though we build an AI to filter out information like that. Just one miscalculation can bring about the death of the human race.
Oh yeah.
well,
But
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you before we move on. Um, it seems that you occupy. I know this is going to be terrible because I'm just going to be insulting Jacob Geller again. But like, it seems that you've managed to like stay afloat in terms of like video game and like culture analysis on YouTube. Um, you've managed to like do something that's interesting and unique because it seems like the field has been overtaken by, again, like the usual suspects of, there's always like a suspicion of like being, I don't know, problematic or something.
Mhm.
But I can only really think of like you, our friend Noah Hugbox, and a few other people who do it quite well and who's, because it depends, because either there's like lowest common denominator, like here's what the
Turkey Tom as
does.
well. Although Turkey
Oh
Tom
yeah, and
does more
Turkey Tom, but
YouTubers.
that's yeah. But even like specifically with video game content or films, it's like the usual, like I'm explaining the plot, but then there's like the other stuff which is sort of like a hyper politicization of it. But I don't know, it's like, even though I'm not a gamer per se, it's like you manage to capture something I think that's there.
Mhm.
Even though I'm skeptical of the ability of video games to deliver us into a sort of truth the way that, for example, the fine arts did.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that it's very interesting, like how you managed to, but even just it says something about our relationship to video games. It's not a simple absorption into a medium. It's like there's a comportment there. There's activity. But at the same time, you sacrifice what Benjamin would call the aura, that sort of uniqueness of what a artistic property is. Now, keep in mind that Benjamin, because he was a Marxoid, he thought that that was a good thing, that in the future, hyper-politicized art would deliver us into the revolution, blah, blah, blah. But if you're like a reactionary, such as myself, then you'd stop at that part where he says that art that is created by an individual through various like ritualistic traditions, that's dead, and that mechanical reproduction, now digital reproduction, that's sort of like gone by the wayside. That's now art becomes this thing. It becomes the culture industry. It becomes like, no longer can like one visionary produce a video game. Although there is people that do that, but there's just so much different
Kojima.
process.
I think like Kojima's somebody
but
who's able to do a good job of that. Like he was able to predict the whole Backstreet Boys World Tour thing in his own way
Oh,
with
yeah, that's right.
Death Stranding. You know, like
no, but
somebody.
there's still like required like a lot of different people to do very hyper specific things.
Yeah, but that's just like a
No.
painter. You could have Rubens, who had a whole factory of people that were, making brushstrokes on his artwork. So at a certain point, with any kind of industry, like Miyazaki has plenty of people. No, Believe me, Miyazaki
You had to bring
has
up
plenty of
just
people.
to piss me off. You had to bring up the Rubens example.
Well, I know I do like.
Okay,
a lot
I'll
of
give you that
Rubenesque.
one, Lev. I'll give
I
you
do
that
like a
one.
lot of Rubenesque ladies out there. Shout out to all the Rubenesque ladies out there. But anyway,
Well, Warhol comes to mind as well.
Yes, Warhol, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you have somebody like Miyazaki, who, from what I understand, is pretty dictatorial when it comes to what he expects of the people who work under him, and it's his vision. It's nobody else's, yet he is able to wield, just like Walt Disney, and you could say the Nine Old Men too, back in the days of old Disney, were able to wield a lot of power and influence. Same thing with the people from Termite Terrace who were making the Bugs Bunny cartoons. But now it almost seems like the people who are in charge of art and entertainment are people who are plugged into a different frequency, I'd say a lower quality frequency, which you could see in a lot of animations that come out today. Like, I don't know, Max, how much animation do you watch? Let's say like Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, any of the stuff that's coming out right now. Like, I could maybe name on my fingers how many like more or less recent animations I really like. I mean, Courage the Cowardly Dog, I know that's not recent, but that comes to mind as being like an example of a modern animation that I think is really brilliant. But other than that, like, I know people have good things to say about Gumball, which was on Cartoon Network. So, there are, Adventure Time, I think, has a lot of interesting things to offer. But it does still seem like people are stuck, at least this is what I've heard from some of the animators who are in California working on this stuff, that people are stuck in the state of fear, that they don't want to overstep on somebody's toes when it comes to saying the wrong thing. And I think it does kind of reflect on the art world and the animation world when it comes to what things end up getting talked about. But I don't know, Max, so what do you think?
So two things. One, I want to address that, but I also want to go back to what Gio was just trying to ask me. As far as watching cartoons nowadays, dog, I can't. The Simpsons is my all-time favorite TV show. I can't even watch.
Oh God,
Yeah.
I grew up with it, man. It's fuck.
I can't even watch the newer episodes of The Simpsons. So no, I don't watch a whole lot of cartoons nowadays. I partially one because I just don't have time. I don't have a lot of time to watch TV. But lately, I will say that because of the positive influence of my girlfriend, who is a huge weeb, she's been getting me into a whole bunch of classic anime. That's why I recently just did a video on a anime that's very much loved called Neon Genesis Evangelion, and just being able to weed out the brilliance of stuff like that. But as far as what's coming out nowadays, I can't say that I've watched stuff like Adventure Time or BoJack Horseman or Family Guy, but although I will say I have watched South Park. I do still watch South Park, and I think that particular TV show is in a special place where, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on or what cultural issues whatever perspective you hold on those, people are willing to project the trickster Joker archetype onto the creators of that show and just allow them to say what they need to say, and we're all the better for it. But again, that's sort of a unique situation, and not a whole lot of other cartoonists nor anybody else who works in TV or movies or whatever, they don't really have that privilege, right?
Well, there's problems with South Park depending on who you ask. By the way, I love that Gio and Lev is red. I love that name, intersectional Aryanist. That's amazing. I love that. We're not Reddick, damn it. Anyways.
No, it's funny considering that most of the time that I spent as far as any of these channels out there would definitely be 4chan, specifically 4chan poll. It's very interesting though that for
you're
a
digging
lot of
yourself deeper, Lev, as a
of
phony. So it's
for a lot of the newcomers who are here, either from Max or Uberboyo, they happen to have a certain opinion, but fuck it, let them have it, and you will learn as we go on what exactly this is about. But anyway,
no, Don't feed. No, South Park is definitely the. I hate to say the best now that King of the Hill is gone, but the problem with South Park is that you always get the discourse around like, I mean, people like there was that one tweet that blew up. I think it was like a few months ago, but it's like regular like South Park's apathy and like Gen X type of make fun of everything that's enabled evil, nasty, reactionary thought. And then you have people on the right, like on my camp, would say that South Park was ultimately never serious about its actual cultural subversiveness. Because South Park, I think, is just it's like a Gen X type of foible. It's like a time capsule. I don't know.
Hmm. Well, yeah, there are always going to be people that do that sort of stuff. And yeah, I've seen those types of people too. I'm just saying that when it comes to the vast majority of people that are aware of the show and that watch the show, it seems like they do have that special status. But there is the potential that if we continue to go down the road that we're going on in regards to people that just want to cancel people over a particular opinion or something that they might have said, whether it happened in the present or 10 years ago or more, they might not have that special privilege as the years go on. We have to be careful.
Well, there is an interesting article that I read called How Cancel Culture Hurts the Left. So in the article here, and I'm going to post it in the chat as well.
Where is it from, Lev?
They say it is from Unheard. Unheard, friend of the show.
Oh God, no, not. Oh no, I can already tell this article. I mean, I love Unheard, but Claire Lehman is. Oh, well, is that J.K. Rowling?
No. Well, no. This is not Claire Lehman. This is Kat Rosenfield.
Oh, no, but is that picture of J.K. Rowling?
Yes, that is a picture of J.K. Rowling. But it goes on to say here, who is this a problem for? Who actually gets threatened, shamed, or fired for failing to fall in step with the social justice left? The fact is, it's not conservatives. What the free speech fretting from the political right often misses is that this culture war is largely a left-wing civil war, and its worst casualties tend to be self-inflicted wounds. American society is increasingly segregated along political line, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, Max, do you agree with that statement or no, that it is mostly a left-wing civil war, and according to the end of this article, that it may not be as doom and gloom as people in the doom and gloom industry make it out to be, where they're talking about blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Everybody subscribe, patreon.com/breaktherules while I'm scrolling up. Okay, here we go. So, concerned parents are swarming school board meetings, speaking out against race essentialist curriculum in classrooms. Innovative alternatives to Rob and D'Angelo-style diversity trainings are beginning to gain traction. So is an organized pushback against discriminatory ones. A legion of writers pushed out of legacy media are launching a mini revolution on Substack. Cancel culture is getting more unpopular by the day, especially with younger Americans. Our legislators are beginning, albeit in their usual halting, bumbling way, to address the difficult question of how to preserve America's speech protections in an age when most of it takes place on digital platforms. So there you have their perspective. Max, curious what you think.
Forgive me, I'm not exactly sure what question you're asking me. Are you just asking for my general...
Yeah, your general thoughts as to whether this anti-doom and gloom sentiment of actual liberals who are going to be fighting against what they see as not being actually liberal, if that is something that may give way to potentially, more creativity instead of just making everything very politicized as it has been recently.
It's hard to say, man. It's just, you see how feverish those people that are you could tell they are somewhat in favor of cancel culture, even though they won't outright say it. And the fact that a lot of those types of people tend to be in control of the means of distribution of information. I like to think, given the backlash that we have seen, and the more that people learn about the way that cancel culture works and just how it ruins people's lives, that they'll realize, okay, well, if we don't put a stop to this now, it's going to come around to each and every one of us and ruin our ability to move forward in the world. So I have to remain optimistic, but I will say that given how overzealous some of these people can be, it's going to be a long, arduous fight. And
to what Gio was speaking about earlier, I just wanted to quickly add in here, when it comes to creating art, creating culture in the first place, I do feel like among people who are reacting to a lot of very left-leaning ideas, they spend so much time reacting to them that they don't really spend that time making art. They don't really spend as much time making something as creative. So I don't know, G, I'm curious what you think about that as well. And
Oh,
Max,
definitely.
do you find that there is this dearth of culture in general where on the one hand, on the left side, there are the usual suspects of the things that they would promote, and it feels very bereft of any energy, while all the energy on, let's say, the right or on the left that's sick of whatever's going on to, what they would have considered to be previously a liberal culture, like all this time is being spent on just fighting, 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 and nothing's really being created.
Well, yeah, that's true. But also, what was predominantly more like things like art forums that would appeal more to a quote unquote reactionary audience, they have slowly been like taken over and hipsterized. Like video, like anything that had sort of a latent masculinity to it, whether it be like comic books or pro wrestling or metal, or it seems that they no longer possess like metal is a great example of how it was largely the music of like lower class white kids, right? But then as time went on, now it becomes this like niche bourgeois, like Reddit hipster stuff, But besides that, I think to bring in a good example would be
Did you see what I have on the screen, by the way?
oh god. Yeah. Oh
so you
no.
see that,
oh god.
So you see, that's what I'm talking about. That seems to be the
conservatives,
reaction.
they make very bad like stuff. That's the equally cancerous problem. But no, what Max's recent video on there will be no splinter, what was it called, there's never going to be another Splinter Cell or something like that,
Yeah.
that hit the nail, like that hit the nail on the head, right? In that there's a few factors. The one theory is that cancel culture is basically a way of like this like hideous form of like leftist eugenics among themselves in terms of like elite overproduction and fighting for positions and sort of like what happens when bio-Leninism has a bit of competition.
Wait, explain what bio-Leninism
well, that's like the
is.
spandrel thing about like people, to ensure institutional loyalty, you'll put like people who are more susceptible to ideology, who have like very low like lumpen proletarian positions, you put them in positions of managerial power and they'll be loyal to the system, which I had problems with. But basically they say the cancel culture is a way of like mediating the sort of very few positions in the increasingly smaller space of getting positions within elite institutions. There's that theory, but also what Max was saying in his video, it's basically it's the problem of capitalist production in general when it comes to culture, when it comes to that is the culture industry, where especially with video games, because video games, remember, it's the only apart from like a few indie developers, it's the only non-decentralized art, if we want to call it art form, let's call it cultural production, because it still requires a system. It requires huge studios with a lot of resources, with a lot of manpower. Or I'm sorry, Zur power. I'm very sorry for all the people in the industry.
How dare you?
Yeah, I know. But so because of that, these video game companies, what are they going to do? Are they going to produce a very niche specific thing that's going to have a gamble but is a brilliant piece of culture and art? Or are they going to produce another fucking Call of Duty shit that has essentially the same engine they've used since Modern Warfare 2? What are they going to do, right? That's the problem.
But when haven't there been junk? When haven't there been just like
but the difference the difference is, Lev, is that I'm not cutting you off, am I?
No, go on.
The difference being is that the reason that the woke stuff is such a contentious thing is because they're trying to maximize their viewership base. So in America, they'll market it as, here's like an empowered woman of color that's going to like be a kick-ass Mary Sue and fight off the evil hordes of Nazis that took over the South again, like in the Wolfenstein one. But in China, they'll market it differently. It's basically the forces of capital trying to maximize production over...
Eventually, they'll have different skins for the lead character, so they'll have the exact same sequence.
They're starting that, actually, yes. Yeah. So, for instance, that one clip that went viral of the, was it Warcraft? World of Warcraft, where the one woman asked, can you make like the
Yeah.
less sexy, right? And I agree that that was a stupid answer. I do think that you should probably have woman characters who are more realistic. Like that's I have no problem with that. Frankly I think like these like nerds like fawning over video game characters, like the what was that one video game with like the very shapely women? It's kind of like Fortnite.
Can you be more specific?
I know. The recent one that came out that had like the teams defending ferrying a person. Oh god, the one character is a lesbian.
Overwatch.
There you go. Yeah, I agree. Like that's ridiculous, and that's probably going to infantilize younger men. But at the same time, I think that I don't know. I mean, again, that's the problem is that a lot of it. I mean, yes, there is a specific cultural agenda, but there's also the factor of like it's trying to maximize capital itself. That's if you can break the system from the parameters of you have to have these certain target demographics that you have to hit. You have to make a certain benchmark of income in order to even invest in a video game to begin with. That's the problem. And I think your video, you laid that out very well, Max.
Thank you.
Yeah. And like you said, music is the same because music, rock music is dead for a variety of reasons. And metal is also dead. I hate to say it, lifelong metalhead, but it's dead as well. And the metal journalist killed it. Anyways, go ahead, Max. I'm just ranting right now. So.
Well, no, I agree with you. See, one thing I don't think I actually happened to get to in my Splinter Cell video is how our culture, thanks to the advent of the internet and our attention always being taken up by things that are entertaining to us, just things that promote the release of dopamine within our brains. Because it's so available and so immediately accessible, we're constantly going after that peak experience. And that's why, in my opinion, things like games like battle royales, where every game that you play is always just so intense and releases those positive chemicals, it's games like those that are constantly getting sales back and making these huge profits. Whereas games that are more artistic and don't necessarily go for that dopaminergic experience, they don't do as well. And I think that as we move forward, we're going to have to become more and more aware of this if we're not going to let games like Call of Duty, games like Overwatch completely take over the market and make it impossible for AAA games with artistic capacities to become extinct. That's
what makes it AAA. I think Noah Hugbox was talking about this. What exactly, for people like me who are total Luddites and who don't play video games, the last video game I really seriously played was like GTA 4. What makes a game AAA?
Well, it's a bunch of different factors. It's the size of the team that's working on it. It's the type of game that you're aiming to produce. So let's say a game like Among Us is a lot easier to produce than a 3D open world game like GTA is. With a game like that, you need hundreds, sometimes thousands of programmers working on animations, making sure that the level of detail, when you look off into the distance, it looks good and doesn't look like crap. Making sure that all the animations for the guns and the character models look good. It's basically just making sure that everything about the game is top of the line in the industry. That's why Grand Theft Auto is the perfect example of that, because it is that, especially GTA 5. When it came out, that was state of the art. And in a lot of ways, even 8 years later, it still is.
There was this game, though, I don't remember the title right now, it escapes me, but it had a dev team that resulted in these very cringe-looking faces of the main characters. You know, like that outer space game?
Because they were trying to, make
what
them
was the
less
name
sexy. I remember that.
Mass Effect, that's it.
Oh, yeah.
Mass Effect.
My face is too tired.
So you can have that, but like in the same game where you can have sex with aliens.
Hmm.
You
Well,
think
it's like
Giorgiani has played Mass Effect?
maybe. I mean, it's like they can't let us.
Didn't want to. I had this fire speech, Lev, where I wanted to like shred him with a few Bible quotes, but it's all right. Well,
That's
nah,
right. Who knows what's gonna happen in the future? By the way, one of my favorite facial expressions is this one over here from the Mass Effect girl.
Oh,
I have no
and
idea
Uberboy,
about
are you here, buddy?
Uberboyo. Speak to us. Are you there?
God, that fucking. I
Yes, yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm
Hello,
afraid
Steph.
made memes of that face.
I won't be here too long. I'm afraid. I actually just kind of screwed up schedule and whatnot, but I popped in. I wanted to say hello, Max. How are you, sir? By the way.
Oil
And
fucking alert. What's happening, man?
Woo!
how's the crack?
Yeah.
How's life? How's life? But yes, I'm here. I'm listening, and I hope all is well.
All is well. Well, since you're here right now, Uberboyo, I wanted to ask both you and Max. You wear the mask of the yellow man. In fact, when we're talking about staying yellow, you're talking about the Simpsons. We're talking about the Simp Sons. We are talking about the sons of those who have simped being attached to this material reality for generation upon generation. So when it comes to the collective unconscious, one of the things that I'd like to propose is that when you were making that video, Max, about the Overlook Hotel in The Shining, as an example of the collective unconscious manifested, I would go one step further and say our entire reality, everything that we are experiencing in this physical space, is a manifestation of the collective unconscious. And if you start to pay attention, you start to notice certain signals, whether we're talking about synchronicity, whatever you want to call it, you start to notice certain signals going on in the world. And so my question to both of you guys is there a way you think of transversing the spiritual plane where people would be able to, if not enlightened, at least not be stuck repeating the same cycles that, like, Max, you were talking about in relation to The Shining, in relation to Jack Nicholson's character, ends up being reincarnated and stuck in this particular cycle? Can we get out of these cycles no matter which cycle we happen to be in? And do you see there being, and I sort of asked this to Max, I sort of asked this to Max before, and I'm going to ask this to Uberboyo again. Do you think that there are certain larger cycles we can be a part of that are more fine spiritually, more vibrationally high, whatever you want to say, like not as physical, more of a mental state where we can exist as thought forms? So anyway, that's a mouthful, but whoever wants to start, yeah.
I kind of have a bit of a take on that. So you to stay thematically with many of the things that Max brings up is like we're talking about video games, and I think a very interesting mental model is to understand the world we live in as a, how could you say, open source video game like Minecraft, where there's a lot of participants and it's not really, there's no strict mission, if you will, and we just have this sort of dopaminergic systems that are getting us to pursue foundational life goals, which is to beat the basics of entropy through sex and food and whatnot. But then some quite interesting things begin to happen, that obviously you get absorbed in the game so much that you begin to think that it's reality. And you guys might have been talking about this already, so apologies if it's just a reiteration of a theme.
No,
but
you're good.
you start to see that it's a like, you start to get absorbed in it and forget that it's a video game. And then what you see happening now at the sort of apex of techno culture, of high postmodern capitalism, if you want to say that, is there's a lot of these people at the top who have very, very high positions of comprehension of the world. They're starting to get into like simulation theory and whatnot. So they're sort of saying to themselves, the world is not real. Like, we live inside a simulation, which is essentially the re-arrival of the Gnostic perspective that there's a demiurge that created this reality, and this reality is fake and hell, and or at least at the very least
Fake
just
in
fake.
G-Slur.
Yes, and like Plato's simulation and the cave and all this stuff. And what you might start to understand then is that it was almost like you started playing a video game, you got lost in it, and there's this slow realization that, holy shit, I'm playing a video game. And I wonder, are we sort of culturally at that point? And then when people use word like the collective unconscious, this is where things get really, really interesting. That's almost like the reservoir of our sort of collective perspective, if you will, like our kind of united gathered thoughts, our kind of stance on what's going on. And are we sort of reaching a point right now where we're starting to get very, very aware it could be incorrect, but we're starting to get very, very aware that the world is quite a surreal place, and there's all these, as we could say, synchronicities, these glitches happening in the matrix, and are they sort of signaling to enough of us at this point that there's something about to change, or there's something unreal about what's going on, and are we getting advanced enough in our data collection that we can actually sort of cross-analyze these things and start to detect, as I think I heard Alex Jones say before, like they're noticing bleeding out through the black holes, like there's glitches in the matrix and all this type of stuff. And is this what's going on maybe at the highest level? They're sort of poking at the edges of the video game, at the edges of the Minecraft server, and being like, wait, how do we break out of this thing? Like, what's the limits to this type of thing? Maybe it's not about space and shooting in rocket ships, it's about dimensions and kind of escaping in that type of way. So
Uberboyo, I wanted to ask you. Oh,
well,
sorry.
I also want to know what Max thinks about what Uberboyo said. Then we're gonna go to
Well, are we just asking for my opinion on the nature of the collective unconscious?
Well, we talked about that before. I guess what I want to try to see here is if this whole thing is partly a video game or whatever you want to call it. How much do you, let's say, look at something like what you were talking about in the video with Answer to Job? How much do you look at this nature of us and the nature of God as being something where we can empower the self, however you want to say that, and through empowering the self can reach maybe not all the way to God initially, but to somewhere higher than it is right now? And what do you imagine that looks like?
Well, Jordan Peterson, he said that out of the entirety of human history, if Jung was right and it is possible to achieve the ideal version of ourselves, there's probably only been two people that ever did it. One was Jesus and the other one was Buddha. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, is that the way that we should be going, even if the odds are infinitesimally, you know what I'm trying to say, against us? Is it possible that on the way to the self that we're able to approach higher levels of conscious existence? That's something that the Buddhists and the Hindus thought. Unfortunately, it's difficult to say. It's just the nature of spiritual experience. It's all subjective to you. And I would hope that anybody who approaches spiritual issues like that will sort of take the same path that Jung did, which is you're trying to balance the knowledge of science with the soul of spiritualism and religion in everything that you do, and try to be honest with yourself, because at least then you will be able to approach something like the objective self, the God man that we're all trying to emulate. But again, it's just a theory, and you got to see if it works best for you. And
Well, I wanted to ask both you and Uberboyo. I think the two thinkers to me in the age of sort of like what Bauman called liquid modernity or hypermodernity, I think the two most important thinkers, what Deleuze said, that it's the century of Foucault. I think that we're going to live in the century of Deleuze and the century of Jung, ironically enough. I think that, for example, I was reading about how they want to program like AI and voice command within like our like planned city environments themselves. So like when you walk down the street, you'll hear like this disembodied voice of of like someone telling you the time or the weather or something. It's like almost like schizophrenia in a way. It's really this weird, like they want to create like the inner ringing of like this shamanic experience where the trees talk to you, right? But it's really interesting. How do you both think that Jung's corpus of theory, especially when it comes to the unconscious, is it affirmed or is it problematized in the age of like technology and liquid modernity and so forth? Because like, for example, when you talked about the UFO experience, I wonder like if someone could like do a deep dive in the ways in which Jung's stance towards technology, especially when it comes to globalization, how does that work? Does it problematize it, or does it strengthen Jung's claims?
Okay, I'm going to say two words, and then I'm going to give it over to Uberboyo because I know he's going to go ham with this, okay? AI, Jesus, go.
Oh, God.
There's a load of stuff you have to bring it up, especially the like there's well, I guess Gio, like maybe I should try articulate what I think you're asking, so I can kind of point it in a more direct question. Because are you sort of saying, is Jung's model of the unconscious a functional philosophical category to help us deal with the chaos of what seems to be coming in terms of AI, maybe even replacing Jesus and offering us salvation and whatnot, as is often promised, and then turning into the voice in our head instead of the Holy Spirit that might be inside of us all?
Well, I think AI will mimic, as it is said in Revelation, this Antichrist will seem like Christ. It will mimic the cadence of Christ. So maybe no, but I think that's a good Is Jung's model, given, for example, the experience of globalization and information networks, like you said, is it a philosophical category that can help us explain and sort of navigate our hypermodernity?
So a theme you'll often get from listening to me is I'll be banging on about jargon. I'll be like, everything's jargon. We hate jargon. I'm a member of the global secret society of anti-jargon countermeasures. And what I sort of mean by this is it's like you should never explain your jokes, but it's just sort of a meme on how midwit the vast majority of like thinkers are and intellectuals are, because they get bedazzled by the amazing words that people bring up. So for example, a grug and nobody will come in and they won't understand any of these strange words like unconscious and anima and the shadow. And so if, a Jungian wants to teach the grug the Jungian psychology, you will use these categories in order to sort of like signals or signs to point him towards these phenomenon within the mind. But ultimately, these are just signposts. They're not actually real. They're not actually in any way useful. Well, all right, Jesus, no, that's not correct. They're not in any way true. They're just useful. And what you're using these pieces of jargon, this is literally what the term means to do, is you're creating sort of names to point people towards things. And jargon can be incredibly accurate, like just like names and categories are, like concepts can be incredibly accurate, but they ultimately fall short of the actual real thing, the actual experience. They're just a sort of a representation. And this is actually very common in simulacra or simulacrum. Is that Deleuze? I'm not too sure. The guy
Simulacra.
Yeah. So it's sort of that type of indication. And then the sort of step after this is realizing that, as a high wit, a genius wit, whatever you call this, you start to realize that jargon was only ever a signpost, and you must actually reintegrate the experience for yourself and understand it. So when Jung says, someone at the door here, when Jung says jargon, what does he exactly mean? What is he when he brings up the shadow, or he brings up the anima, or he brings up all these type of things, what is he pointing towards? And that's actually a phenomenological experience that's almost uncategorizable. He simply uses the categories to help us see this stuff. So he goes through a psychotic schizophrenic break, essentially, which is what we would categorize that now with our jargon, but that doesn't mean that's what it is. That's just a word we use. But nonetheless, he goes through something we would jargonize as schizophrenia, and he has this massive breakdown. All this stuff pours into him. He has this huge experience of like a fucking voice in his head telling him that World War I is going to happen, and then it does happen. And then he has this soul, this female inside of him, the inner girl, and sort of say, all right, like I love you, but you've kind of rejected me, and I'm empty, and you need to fill yourself up with energy, and I will empower you. This is his anima. And then he goes through all this vista of explorations and all this stuff, and he's just like fucked after this. He's like, what just happened here? Where did that come from? What was going on here? Like, who was this? How did something come out of my head and talk to me and tell me the future and predict it correctly? Like, Jesus. And so he sits there and he's like almost lost it, almost ended up like Nietzsche, hugging the horse, running around, eternal incel, being taken care of by his sister. He almost lost it. He almost lost the run of himself. Yeah. And so he sits down and he tries to order what happened to him by creating a sort of conceptual way of seeing things, a conceptual language, a set of jargon, a set of concepts. And this turns into Jungian psychology, if you will. And then the mistake that I see so many people making is that they turn around then and say that, like, all right, well, Jung categorizes all this stuff, and therefore he becomes like a prophet, and you must take his jargon and then say that's going to be the stable categories that we're going to use for the rest of time in order to conceptualize something. And it might not be the case at all. Like, maybe Jung could show us a method of thinking that will be incredibly useful, but it won't take us anywhere. It won't actually like help us. It won't actually get us. It might not be the final way that we conceptualize the experience of the mind or any of these type of things. Right. It might be a set of signs that we have to culturally critique, and then we'll move on to a new set of ones. And there's many arguments for Christianity, for example, that it was sort of taking Hellenism's categories and concepts and adding an embodied spirit, as Peugeot said to me the other day. Like, it's exactly that way of thinking about this stuff. And so what will be the correct model for the future is hard to say. More than anything, we're actually sort of wrestling with the idea of, like, how do you correctly categorize what is currently happening? What is the phenomenon of the mind that are in force? And the thing that I'm always encouraging people to do is that, like, if we're going to talk about the collective unconscious, like, what do you mean? If you talk to a Christian about this stuff, oftentimes, like, someone who's not really aware of Jung or doesn't like Jung, they'll simply use God to replace the word the collective unconscious. And when you actually break down the jargon, even though that sounds weird, that's not exactly what's going on. This is how the words interchange in parlance. The synchronicity means destiny, you know. The anima means the Holy Spirit. Like, these are the sort of transitions, the commonalities, the true experience underneath this stuff. And if we're really to talk about what is going to consolidate as the philosophical categories, the mental categories that we're going to use to represent the world to ourselves in the future, God knows, will it be something new? Will we double down on Jung? Maybe. Like, many of Jung's concepts have made it into daily life. Extrovert, introvert is a perfect example. But I guess the thing that I'm always focusing on is the understanding of what thinking is and how people mentally model stuff. And as I would often say, the left hemisphere loves categorizations and it loves getting consolidated in them. But the right hemisphere's job is literally to annihilate those and shear that stuff apart and rebaptize them with new and better ones and whatnot. And so are we sort of going to go through some type of experience like that? So there's so much that you asked me that I have to cover that I can't cover, but I guess I just sort of leave that thesis there at its roots. And I'm afraid to say I'll probably have to bounce soon enough as well, gentlemen.
Well, before you bounce, anybody here who has any quick super chat you want to do right now, sneed those super chats right now for Uberboyo, for Max, for us to answer, and we shall do that. That is very important. Yes.
Sorry, Stefan, I need to build off a bunch of what you just said. You said all that beautifully, but in regards to finalizing, I suppose, Jung's idea of the shadow and evolving it to a point where it's a little bit more useful. You were right when you said that a lot of his concepts are just abstract, subjective concepts, and that people refer to these unknowable realities, these archetypes, by different names. Some call it the collective unconscious, some call it God, some call it Brahman, some call it the astral plane. What Jung actually said, and you can affirm this, in Ion, is that the fundamental challenge that we're going to be having over the next Ion, in the Ion of Aquarius, is the coming together of these two spiritual energies, one being the sentiment of science, the other one being the sentiment of religion. And I suppose it's the intermingling of these two energies to try and get to a closer understanding of these things that Jung was getting at, a more accurate understanding that's less abstract and more scientific, more objective. That's going to be something that's going to happen in the next Ion. So, for example, you know, he talks about the shadow. You can't exactly measure what the shadow is or the objective reality of it because it's so subjective to everybody. But as long as you have those two, the scientific and the religious, working towards the same goal and trying to identify what it really is, then maybe we'll get to a greater understanding and be able to apply that understanding when it comes to our construction of things like AI.
Well, speaking of this integration of science and spirituality, do you give any credence to the idea that there are certain processes, like Max, when you were talking about the video of the Great Mother, of chaos, of the feminine energy, of Shakti, whatever you want to call it, that there would be certain things that I can only speak for myself, as far as when I meditate, I see that light in the center, I also see like a donut ring around it. So this is something that I wonder, would this be something that if everybody sat down, started meditating, eventually they would get to that same point of being able to see the exact same thing? Could those things be used in a way to cement a certain objective as opposed to a subjective reality when it comes to what exactly is going on in these higher levels?
It's worth giving it a shot. I'll
Absolutely.
just say that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But Uberboyo, you're going to say something before you head off?
Well, I was going to somewhat address what Max was talking about, because I guess I want to make sure that we're clear, because in some sense, I'm not trying to be I don't want to discard Jung. Like, I certainly don't mean that. I mean, more than anything, that the process of settling down on is very, very, it's actually, I think Nietzsche, I'm a very big Nietzsche shill, because I think Nietzsche correctly conceptualizes the way that he expects people to approach this. You can look up his concept of the philosopher of the future, and he constantly discusses about this idea of reevaluating all values. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, you can't do that and all this type of stuff. But when you really understand what he's sort of talking about, he is asking many people to go in and shear at all understood categories and try to see a breakdown. It's like you create a palace of categories, and that becomes like your worldview. And the process of transforming and evolving is you let that worldview die, and then you have a new worldview that is born, where you reconceptualize and recategorize what's going on. Like, even in terms of neuropsychology, what happens when you dream? Like, the purpose of a dream, it looks like in some level, it's very complicated, but the purpose of a dream is that you wake up during the day and you create a world model in your head, perhaps even in your left hemisphere, your ego, whatever you want to call it. And it's sort of built up of a set of signs and categories, and everything around you gets rendered into low resolution, and everything turns into like little tools that you can use, little categories. Like, even they're built in with like functional statements inside of them. It's like you're coded like a computer. So you're walking around and you see, like, I've got my deodorant here or something like this, and I don't really see it for its eternal resonance of what it is. I see it as like the thing I pick up and press, and I automate that to some extent, and it squirts out this nice smell. So if I see any girls, I can perform the many things that I am designed to perform in that regard. And this is a reduction of reality for the sake of being functional. And this is the left hemisphere doing what it does in its perfect sense. But then what the dreams do is they actually attack and break down and try to update all these categories in your head to give you like rebirths of new possible perspectives. So you hopefully don't have to do that during the day, which is when you kind of need to perform and stuff like this. And this individual process scales to the collective process. And so what you see is with people like Nietzsche, he's sort of saying God is dead. The category palace is going to fall, and we need to reorganize a new category palace that is effective and updated and accurate for the modern world. We need to dive into chaos and come back out of it with a new gleaming way of seeing the world, new set of categories. And Jung participated in that just as much as Nietzsche did. Jung participated in diving into the chaos and coming out with a new set of categories. And many of them are really accurate, and you could even say many of them actually updated our understanding, and many of them are useful. And something like the shadow, we can certainly bring that forward. Like, I don't think there's any. I think that's a great concept, really useful, really helps a lot of people. But then we've got a sort of like a lot of different questions. Like, is that any different than in original sin? You know what I mean? Like, can we cross-analyze these and understand that these categories are these ways of modeling certain mental constructs? Do they share commonalities? Is there a sort of universal perspective? Maybe Jung's concept of the shadow is that perspective, because Jung is a very smart dude. And then is there parts he got like that could be challenged from his things? And what do they help us do? And do we need to create new categories? Do we need to just take the ones that Jung found useful and get rid of them? He said his project was to try prove that humans have a soul. And he actually largely believed he failed at doing that. He was very sad about that at the end of his life. But you can kind of see what he's trying to do. Like, he's trying to give us tools or ways or lenses, categories that we can look into ourselves and say that there's an actual real living world inside of us there that we need to kind of connect with a part of. And I guess the great challenge of modeling out the correct ideological or mental or ego, the collective ego for the future, because that's really what the challenge is. We're in the postmodern age now, where we're schizophrenic at the moment. There's no one way of seeing the world, and we need to try consolidate. Well, do we need to? There's even another question. But anyway, the general idea is that, right, let's try collectively settle on an ego so that we become effective, like the way the Christians were settled on the Christian perspective, like the way Rome had its Roman perspective. Do we need to wait for a new one to consolidate? What will that be? In front of technology, what will that mean? People like Jason Giorgiani, who was talking about, he was supposed to be on today, he's talking about, like, how do we conceptualize the mind if telepathy is real, if UFOs are real, if technology is able to penetrate inside of us and rewire our thoughts? Like, what's the correct ego and categories for that? And ultimately, if that stuff comes down the pipe, maybe Jung's categories will work, but maybe they won't, and like maybe they won't be enough. And it's really hard to figure that out and what we're going to do with that.
Do you believe? Yeah.
Sorry, we just have to be open.
We do have to be open, but also, do you think, both of you guys, do you think it's a matter of our personal experience, where every single struggle that we have, it's there specifically for us to overcome it? Would you say that this is a personal test? Would you lean on that being the case? It's like life in general.
Yes, to an extent. Like, always, stand up and be an individual and all that stuff as well. But these things don't happen necessarily with they happen over our heads. They're like gods moving above our heads. Like the categories are almost like the gods. It's weird.
Yeah.
And the way we're conceptualizing the world as a collective, the collective ego, it's above our heads, and it will happen without us as much as with us, and we can certainly participate in it. And Jung would even warn people, it's like, you probably don't want to participate this as much as you wish, because the more you get into the bigger ideas, the more you're going closer to know Jesus's problem, which is to represent the truth. You're going to probably get isolated, betrayed, and killed for this. Like, for example, the more you try to update the categories, the more you run closer to being ostracized, being attacked by the collective
But what's the
ego.
alternative, though? Isn't the alternative just to do whatever it is that you're doing and be stuck in a cycle? Wouldn't the only way out
not at all,
be...
man. You can live a very productive, healthy, and useful life full of meaning by, shutting up and just having a family and just letting the collective ego do what it does. And that's not even a joke. Like, nature can operate her will, which is very, very important, through you when you just turn your head off and stop trying to like get involved with things that maybe you don't need to get involved with. Or you can try to become a high priest. And like, think about this archetype, for example, like, so fascinating. The high priests of the Catholic Church were all celibate. They're like anti-life and anti-nature, but their job was to guide the underclasses and guide them towards life and health. And they promoted lots of babies. Like, that was the kind of trait of the Catholics, like, have lots of kids. It's so strange and ironic. So their sort of celibacy is weirdly the opposite behavior from these people at the bottom. And that's a crazy thing to ask of someone. It's like, do you want to become a neurotic, high IQ intellectual that's like going to not have children, just like go no nut for life or something like this? Or do you want to, like, what's the point of that? It's such a strange way to organize.
Yeah, do you want to become a wizard? But
the
but the problem, though,
being pure in the face of the Lord.
But Uberboyo, the big problem, though, is what Nietzsche points out. He anticipates that there's going to be a divergence between the Ubermensch and the robot people. Do you agree with that? Disagree with that? Do you think that that's why we should emphasize for the people who are able to start evolving over time to do so right now? Or do you think that that's absolute BS? You disagree with Nietzsche there?
What did he say?
Well, he talked about there being a split of people, where on one hand you would have a minority of people who are the Ubermensch, and on the other hand you would have a majority of the people who would be very roboticized. They would just go according to the AI system or whatever we want to call it, and eventually they're just going to be robots in the in that very strict sense of the word, like robot, rabotnik, slave, whatever you want to say. That they're going to be a slave to their passions, even to more of an extent than they are now.
This is that's a hard question, man, and like that's a hard question, and you've got a lot of very, very difficult questions to ask there, because like, as Nietzsche pointed out, like, you think of it this way: if Nietzsche was trying to be a coach for the Brahmin caste, because like the Catholic Church was set up on the philosophy of Plato, and Plato proposed in the Republic a set of, in some sense, eugenic celibate or sexually immoral elites that would go to the top of society and live different than the people they ruled. And the Catholic Church is literally modeled on that. That's what it is. It's the fulfillment of that vision. It's so fascinating to see it play out. And it's not like that didn't work out. Like, the peasants, of course, it wouldn't have been nice to be a peasant, but there was upsides to being a peasant. There was like, it just was what it was, Some things went well, some things went bad, some things were cool. Like, it's nothing is that binary, And then there was a sort of caste system involved there as well. We had the aristocrats, the lords, and they were a very specific set of people. They were the ruling race, if you will, the sort of Germanic kings who took over Rome at the fall of it. And it's a kind of strange network of these things, and in some sense this is like the archetype of the hierarchy, and we're always moving towards that. We can't deny nature, we can't deny hierarchies in nature and class systems in nature that are present. And so when we kind of look at what's happening now, that's the will, like, that's the will of these. It's like the eternal archetype is there needs to be a caste system, even though we don't like it now. There's the rich, the poor, and the middle class. Like, it's there still. Or you could even think of, like, there's the intellectuals or the priests, or the doctors and the intellectuals and the experts. They're essentially the ascendant Brahmins. And then we have maybe the middle class, and then we have the poor or something like this. It's strange. Like, these things show up no matter what, no matter how much we try to change it. And so what is Nietzsche necessarily saying that there'll be a robot people? Maybe he's saying that we're going to go through a chaos and there'll be a self-selection thing, and the peasants of the future will be in a terrible position. And that could be true. Maybe it won't be as bad as people make it out to be. maybe it's our prerogative that we all try to avoid it as much as possible. And then there'll also maybe will be opportunities for people to slot in as the sort of managing or ruling or controlling or ascendant or planning, or like the European aristocrats. And they were downsized, they were like crooked in some ways, but they're also very, very noble in some ways. Were they all powerful, murderous beasts? Definitely not. They were actually tempered quite a lot by the church, but they were also creative in many ways, and they like upsides and downsides with everything. And so is something like this going to form now in the future? Will the Ubermensch be a kind of marriage between the Brahmin caste and the creative aristocrats of the future? Will there be a peasant class? I don't know. I really don't know. But I see Nietzsche trying to conceptualize possibilities for the future. And I think the thing I love about Nietzsche is his concepts just like are razor sharp. Like a lot of them come true in a quite a scary way. So I don't know. Is that a good answer?
No, that was a great answer. I want to make sure, Uberboyo, that you would still have time, or unless you have to go. You got to be very frank with us, just because there may be a super chat coming in. I think one of the people here is about genres and generations, wants to think of a good super chat to ask. So I don't know if that's for you or for Max. So just tell us exactly how much time we have.
Oh yeah. I've time. I'll literally
okay.
I'll bounce in. I'm running out.
All right.
Of it.
So
5-10 minutes.
All right, cool. So there is an anime which I highly recommend everybody check out. It's called Shin Sekai Yori, or From the New World. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but in it kind of talks about, you could say, Giorgiani's prediction of this spectral revolution, where all of a sudden people are going to start developing psychic powers, and what happens then. And what ends up happening is that humanity starts to be ruled by these very strict and cruel lords. For example, there's this one guy who has these psychic abilities who basically forced all the people who are watching him to keep clapping for him. And he said that the 300 people who are the first to stop clapping die. And he could just instantly kill them, just like have them be vaporized. Nice. So people were like clapping for like several days.
I can't wait. I can't wait to get power like that. I'll be like the inner 2-year-old will come out of me. I'll be like a toddler.
Exactly. But eventually they got that whole thing. I don't want to do any spoilers here, but they got that whole thing under control, and they set up these special schools for the kids who have these psychic abilities. But anyway, definitely watch this anime. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is just if we use our imagination here, Uberboyo, beyond that example, do you see any other things potentially happening if psychic powers were found out to be real, if they could be trained?
Yeah, so this is like, it's a good question, and I think Giorgiani, a lot of his stuff like is quite interesting, and he's sort of positing like a whole new way of looking at things. Is like there'll be part of the whole Ubermensch and all this stuff. There'll be parts of this that we don't quite understand, and I think maybe the thing I would say that was most important, again from Nietzsche's work, is to understand the idea of a power struggle. So the classes always struggle between each other. The warriors, the kings, we should call them, and they struggle against the peasants in some way. And the priests are like the left wing in their ideal version. They temper the kings to tame them. And so the kings try to exploit the peasants and use the peasants for taxes, and for example, and then the priests temper them. And then the priests and the peasants work together, but then maybe the warriors will temper the priests, and then the peasants maybe temper both of them. Like there's always these power struggles. There's peasant revolts, and then there might be religious revolts, and then if the priests are pissing off the warriors, they might start to fund Protestantism or fund Catholicism in order to create discord among the church so that they can get political power. And like there's always these power struggles. And whenever new innovations come up, like there's power struggles. It always sort of happens. And so I see, I think the thing that a lot of us struggle with is that in order to decide these things, great amounts of violence, death, and challenge might actually surface. And this is not in any way willed. It's just that it's the sad way that the world works, that things have to be learned the hard ways. Often Nietzsche said all great things have to be thoroughly soaked in blood in order to mark their imprint on humanity's soul. And it's like one of those things, if you could say Protestantism gave birth to individualism, there was a deep, deep, dark war in Germany, the 30 Years' War, that essentially saw half the population annihilated over the course of these type of things. And this was the sort of necessity to free the religious world into seeing things in a new way, if you wish. And so if telepathy comes up, maybe really fucked up things will start happening, and there might be an ascendancy of, like, there's a lot of Bitcoiners that got really rich, a lot of crypto guys that got really rich, and then there'll be the telepathics who become like this sort of ascendant kings. And then I'm assuming a balance of power will start to kick in at some point. It'll have to, like, or else they'll become like a dominant species that will annihilate all the rest of them and form a monopoly, and then they'll start to fragment.
The aliens will come and.
Well,
according to Johnny, that might.
Yeah.
That's why you have to be transhuman Giga Chad soon.
But wouldn't the idea here be is that, let's say, if everybody had the ability to know exactly what they were thinking, in a way, there's something freeing about that, ironically. It's like living in the Satya Yuga, if the word Satya, which means truth, if that is actually what was going on there. If I can imagine the Satya Yuga, it would be a place where all of us know exactly what we're thinking, and we also know that we are a part of God. So imagining that, I mean, it may get a little bit boring, but then again, maybe there are certain things at that higher spiritual level that we can't even have a concept of yet.
I think people are really good at that already. Like, our capacity for empathy is phenomenal. Unbelievable. It's just that most people just don't use it. It's like the way that, like, most people can probably learn to fight and punch and probably hurt someone if they wanted to. They can probably already, like, we already are really good at detecting how people feel and stuff like that. It's really, like, we've got neurological centers that are good at this stuff. Maybe we could get more advanced at it and it could turn into, like, proper psychic stuff. But I just think, like, a lot of this stuff is probably latent and untrained. And is it a question of, like, maybe some people just got to self-select and they would, like, maybe it'll turn into a utopia, or maybe some people will self-select and there'll be a portion of people who live in a culture that's very good at this, and it becomes a sort of utopic place to live, or a certain kind of ascendancy or something, and then there'll be other people who won't, and they'll sink down and become the last man. I'm not too sure. Everything is possible, but I'd also love to hear Max's thoughts on this stuff as well. I know I'm kind of ranting away here, so I don't want to steal a stream on him.
On the Nietzsche, no, it's okay, man. I'm glad when you show up. We haven't done this in like a year and a half. So as far as the nature of psychic abilities, if they're true, let's go with the hypothesis that the collective unconscious is a real thing. I believe that with our human evolution, if we were to evolve to have psychic abilities, it would be something akin to like the Vortigaunts from Half-Life. I don't know if you guys ever played that, where there's they're able to. They share this neural connection with all different members of their species, like a hive mind. So they're always tapped into the collective unconscious, but they also have their identities as singular egos. And it's sort of, just to talk about another thing that I'm famous for talking about on my channel, it's sort of akin to Drunvalo Melchizedek's idea of 46 and 2, which is a song by Tool, that would be the next stage of human evolution, which is moving beyond just the singular consciousness that we possess as singular egos, and being able to share the minds of everybody around us. And that's a terrifying but somehow beautiful idea that I think you were just alluding to with the name of that anime that I've already forgotten, where these abilities start popping up everywhere as we all collectively start to approach that next level of evolution, and how we are able to deal with that. I don't even want to think about it, because actually it's just making me kind of quiver in my space boots just thinking about it. But if the collective unconscious exists, it's possible.
It's a Shinsekai Yori, for those who did not hear it the first time. And I think this was Forever Young who gave me the recommendation to see that anime based off certain other, let's say, controversial views I may possibly hold about the origin of life, which I'm not going to get into right now.
That anime looks suspect, though.
Gio, watch it. Okay,
I don't know. I mean,
yes.
This is why I'm distrustful of anime. The whole can't distinguish their age, you know.
Oh, well, speaking of age or gender, I mean, speaking of gender, there is definitely some homosexuality going on in that anime, but that's
well, they have a different approach to it.
Yeah,
like they have like futanaris and yaoi, and they like the Japanese. They don't have as much cultural bombast as we do. But one thing that Josh said in the chat, which is really interesting, Uberboyo, is that he said we're basically being like ruled by the merchant class now, and I hope he didn't mean that like just in like the meme. Well, not getting into it.
I think he did. But anyway,
Lev's gonna get mad, is he?
I know. No, but it's true in the sense that we're ruled by this incessant sort of logic of capitalist realism, in that the elites now are from the classes that traditionally were near the bottom, in that we're just consuming shit, making shit, buying shit, and really the consciousness of most people is not the sort of aristocratic, most people are going to get left behind. There's going to be a super elite. The picture of the super elite that most people in the ruling class have now is like the bugocracy, like living in the pod cities and consuming shit, consuming experiences now, because of course capital becomes virtual, right? And so the vision of the aristocrat of the past as most people achieving a level of some kind of semi, demigod status, that's gone now. Now the vision of the perfect consumer is like the Matrix bug pod as a human battery.
But no, like I would definitely I think the vision of becoming a demigod, and Nietzsche, I'm such a fucking dork, I'm always banging on about him, but I'm in love with a German incel. But he has this very interesting phrase from his discussion of the Bronze Age, and I'm not sure what to make of it, but he describes that the Bronze Age was divided into sort of different histories depending on who was reciting it. So the people who would have been the helots, we'll say, would have experienced, I think I've talked about this before, would have experienced the Bronze Age of literally being tortured by a set of people who would essentially have appeared like Arnold Schwarzenegger from the Terminator, meaning like the guys who cladded themselves in bronze armor and showed up, I shit you not, showed up like robots. Like that's literally the archetype we're banging on about when you think about it. Like the robot lords who come down and oppress, the aliens who come down and oppress. And these characters, these Bronze Age men, they think of how strange that would have been. The myths that would have been like. These people would have seen like demons, monsters, tyrants, oppressors, horrible beings from hell, terminators, robots coming in, killing you and enslaving you, and then becoming your elite and stuff like this. And then, of course, the consciousness and the experience of the myths from these bronze men themselves, the men wearing the armor, the likes of Achilles and all this, is that they would have had, as Nietzsche called it, a master morality. They would have had a very clear conscience and creative conscience that would have painted a sort of beautiful picture of their lives and this sort of natural pride and natural celebration of their own health and celebration of their own beauty and all these type of things, and the disrespect and disgust they would have had for the people that they conquered and whatnot. And as Nietzsche said, a clear conscience about that is quite unique. And I think that's such an interesting thing to observe, because you see that stuff. It even offers some very strange questions about the nature of ancient religions. Like, for example, Greek religion has got a combination of most Indo-European religions, but Greek religion is a good example. They've got something called the Titans. The Irish have this too, and the Scandinavians have this too. The ice giants. But the Titans were the original set of gods, and they were conquered by the Olympians. And the original set of gods, like many of them, they're very colorful characters, and many people sort of hypothesized that they were actually representative of the original native people who lived in Greece before the Indo-Europeans came in and established Zeus and Apollo and their representatives. And the sort of conquest of the gods is representative of a conquest of people and a sort of capitulation of a people to a new set of rules, a new set of gods. And that's actually how gods were understood in the past. When you lost to someone else, they imposed their gods upon you as a signal that your spirits beat their spirits. And this is why the Romans saw Christianity as atheist, because it was like, and the Jews as atheists, is because like, why don't you admit that this is obvious we won? Like you're not playing the God game correctly and all this type of stuff. And they innovated a new way of doing religion, and the Romans were like super pissed off about that. And the same sort of thing then asks us about what's happening now. Like, look at our myths, look at our stories. There's an ascending vision of like Iron Man, and if you think about that, that's the transhumanist techno super god. That's like, if you think about Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, when these guys get enough money and the technology gets good enough, like, is it possible for them to become the bronze men? They become the Iron Men, become immortal, become like, maybe they're aiming for that. Like, will they do it? Very big question, but maybe they're aiming.
Have you seen Jeff Bezos inside of the Mech Warrior suit?
An iron
exactly.
carapace.
and he's also got like, he's flying to outer space and all this type of stuff. And it's annoying. Like, I don't like thinking, oh, Jeff Bezos looks like a bit of a dork when I think about it. I don't like the idea that he's going to be the next Achilles. But at the same time, can I really like kind of be resentful and get angry? Like, it is what it is. He, like the merchants that everybody gets sort of, oh, the merchants took out the kings. In fairness, like they were playing the game and they won and they ascended and became the bourgeoisie, I think they called them, or whatever it was.
Well,
the petite bourgeoisie.
And,
Well,
and then what you have is
Mhm.
Bezos coming up, and he's sort of ascending to the cream of the crop. And will he pull it off? Maybe he's at the right place in the right time that he'll become the techno aristocrat. Maybe he won't, man. I don't really know. But it's something to very, very, very much think about. Is that his level of power and the way he'll appear to us is sort of like we're annoyed at him becoming transhumanist, and we're like the helots bitching about his supreme power and his victory. But ultimately, him and his sphere of life is probably operant as a clear conscience, being like, I'm using technology to transform my experience and take over space or something like this, and I'm going to go and become ascendant man transitioning into the higher levels or something like that.
Well,
And maybe,
here's why I would disagree with that statement
well,
specifically with
just
Bezos. Sure.
let me finish
Go
the
for it.
thought.
Go
Like,
for it.
maybe he'll pull it off, but
Mhm.
maybe he won't. Like, his instincts will tell him this is who you are, and he could be right, and he could pull it off, and we'll be sitting there rage quitting on the thing. We'll be like the pink Wojaks down here, and he'll be off in like outer space, like turning the moon into an Amazon fulfillment center or something like that. We're like, no. But then he could also be wrong, and then the telepaths could come along, as Giorgiani would say, and absolutely dominate him and dominate all of us, and then end up like ruling the world in their own way. Or then the aliens might come and do the same thing. I don't really know. And these things are all kind of up in the air and in some sense for question. But I think the slots are possible to get filled up.
Someone in the chat said it's like WCW versus WWE. Yeah, that is true. Vince McMahon took over the old gods and destroyed them, destroyed their legacy of WCW, and imprinted his own corporate version of what sports entertainment is. And
Well,
so, you know.
But to what Uberboyo was just saying right now, if the psychic people come in, they'll kick Bezos' ass. Maybe. Bezos' problem, I think, is that, not a problem, but just who he is. He's a great businessman. He's a shrewd businessman. When it comes to, and by the way, Gio, that's an example of somebody who is, I'm not going to say anymore. Anyway, when it comes to Bezos being a shrewd businessman and good at that stuff, you still can't compare him to somebody like Nikola Tesla, who you could say in a way he had so much power that at the end of his life he also got a little bit mad. I mean, look, nothing against having a love affair with a pigeon, you know, as long as you keep it strictly platonic. But when it comes to the amount of power that somebody like Tesla had, and you look at Tesla at the end of his life, and he looked like a shell of his former self. He looked like somebody who had sex with a super Bible black tier succubus that at the end of it was just like this frail sand mummy person. At least that's
like
how
John
I see.
David Ebert.
Yeah, like John David Ebert, exactly. So that's how I
Yeah.
see Nikola Tesla. And the question there is a lot of this power too much for humans, even biologically speaking, to hold?
By the way,
It's a
that
good
was a shitty move for Giorgiani to go kick man while he's down. But anyways, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's a good question. It really is a good question. But I guess like power is not. You shouldn't fetishize power. You should always understand the application of power. Like if I give you the electricity and you just stick your hand on like the cable and be like like that's not the way you're supposed to. No matter how much electricity you have, you should be careful with it. But if you properly use it, it can be the most powerful tool in the world and absolutely revolutionize your life. And the same with like energy or whatever, or violence or strength or whatever it is. Like it's the application that is where it comes from. And something like Tesla, he was very, very ingenious, and he used to sort of sacrifice that the genius of humanity does in order to advance all the rest of us, to open up power for us. But the people who actually make that practical, which is annoying to kind of think about, but the people who are sort of level-headed and shrewd and take stuff like what an innovator like Tesla figures out and make it functional, they're usually the guys who monopolize the actual power. And they're usually the
Westinghouse, Rockefeller, specifically J.P. Morgan as well in relation to Tesla.
And it's annoying, but it's the reality, you know, and you kind of have to think about it. It's like, you know, you have a genius like Young or a genius like Tesla, and we'd love for them to become the philosopher king, but I just don't think it works that way, you know. I think what happens is then you usually get a shrewd dude who's not going to be much of an innovator. He's more of a sort of in the middle. He'd be like open, but also organized. And, you know, a bit more left brain, we'll put it this way, and which is fine. And he'll sit down and he'll systematize this stuff and put it into place and monopolize the power and get it sorted out and manage it and put it in place. And he'll then use what Tesla figured out in order to try his best to ascend to his Ubermensch status. He might make it and he might not.
That's even like my criticism of, and I want to get Max's take, but that's like my criticism of Neo Reaction, for example, is that when you start like worshiping power just in its raw property, in its raw presence, then you end up like justifying like a lot of terrible even Moldbug has like a lot of terrible takes. It's basically like, well, power, we should get it, so therefore it's like you just turn yourself into a neoliberal at that point, because it's like, well, I guess they have all the power, so might as well. Like, it's, I don't know. Anyways, go.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like,
Yeah.
power is a really confusing thing. Like, this is Foucault coming out 101. Like, power is so confusing and so disparate and so strange. And like, you know, how much power does the Bitcoin and crypto community have? How much power does the Anon Pepe posters on Twitter have? Like, they actually have significant mimetic influence. And like, is that power? What does that mean? And how do these things work? It's really hard. How much power does a pro athlete have through influence on Instagram or something like that? Actually, quite significant, you know. And then is like, how do you organize all this? How do you take all these disparate forms of power and use them and leverage them properly to get results? And that's ultimately, I think people should fetishize results more than they should fetishize phenomenon like power.
How much power do the Super Chat people have? Quite a lot. And we have $5 from Genres and Generations. And I would love to start this with Max. By the way, Gio, we hear the typing. I want to start this. No problem. I want to start this with Max. Will transhumanism lead to a technological and social golden age, or will it lead to massive upheaval resulting from inequality in biological function? Go.
I will have to admit, given the type of fiction that I have read in my life, that I'm a little bit more pessimist when it comes to this particular question, because when human beings have had the ability to wield power that would make them a god among men, they tend to not wield it in the most ideal of ways. I think that though it will be necessary for stuff like that to happen, it will be necessary for those tragic mistakes to happen in order for us to be able to reach something positive and universal that all human beings can adapt to and really become transhumanist. Because I don't think we're going to get it right the first time. It's just not in our nature.
Yeah, look at breast implants.
Yeah.
You never get it right the first time. But the and Uberboyo, any thoughts on that as well?
I'm actually afraid I'm going to have to bounce, so I won't be able to wrap up any thoughts. But I want to just say thank you, Max. It's great to hear you again, and thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
As always,
I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you soon. Please follow Uberboyo on Twitter at Uberboyo, and also please subscribe to his life coaching. Get Uberboyo to coach you; you will not be disappointed. I guarantee it. I've never done it, but I guarantee it.
There's only one way. There's only one man who read the books. There's only one man who knows the jargon. So
Uberboyo.com.
I'll talk to you later, people. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
Take care. And by the way, everybody, subscribe, and keep subscribing. Like Lenin said, uchitsa, uchitsa, I uchitsa, which means learn, and learn.
Speaking of a schizophrenic environment and sort of unconscious sexuality, look at what Lisa Bode said a while back in the chat. My God, speed run until you face Geo level 7, the sex slave. Use all mastered methods to Pfizer his arms and clothe him into eternal sleep. Take his Hawaii shirt, rake the profits and BJs. What the fuck?
Oh, man, the Shevitz. All right, well, what I want to get into is one of the most fascinating videos that you've done, Max, about the answer to Job. So, as far as the nature of God that you got from that, I wasn't exactly too clear. This is one of those videos that I have to watch multiple times to really get it, or I can have you explain it here, whichever one works. But it does remind me a little bit of what is in certain, let's say, mystical Jewish sects, where they talk about the relationship of God and man, is that God needs man as much as man needs God, if that makes sense. So I was curious if you could expand a bit on how you see God from Answer to Job.
Well, the whole relationship between God and man and both needing each other, it rests on Jung's belief that God, specifically the God of the Jewish tradition, Yahweh from the Old Testament, is an unconscious God. And the only way that God can really gain knowledge of himself or really assure himself that he exists is if he has somebody, he has conscious beings to help validate his existence. It's the whole subject-object dichotomy. So you have one looking at the other and the other looking back in order to have, that cycle of perception, so that both can validate each other's existence. Without that being there, and then God would just continue to be an unconscious phenomenon, unable to really validate whether or not he is there or not. That's why, at least in Jung's mind, he created human beings so that he could have that relationship and continue to gain continuous knowledge of himself. And we see the apex, the beginning of that progression towards consciousness in the story of Job, because in Jung's mind, God acted rather reprehensibly during that whole exchange in the way that he treated Job, because Job, his entire life, he was a very, very moral being. He was the greatest of his servants, at least according to God. And for him to treat him in the way that he did, it goes against at least human perception of the way that a moral and legal contract should work. It's like, hey, if I'm going to live in accordance with the way that you want me to live, then you have to fulfill certain requirements as a part of that bargain.
Yeah, I mean, the criticism I have, Answers to Job is quite like a Gnostic heretical text.
Yeah.
And as Warren Hatcher says, God is beyond being, God does not need us. Yeah, that's true. I think that the fact that God has allowed creation in his image is not to necessarily validate. I mean, that was Jung's view, but in the view of like either Orthodoxy or Catholicism, it's not so much to validate God as a person, but rather it is to give light to creation that allows a space for more so for us. It's like this. I mean, Simone Weil had a similar view to Jung in that, like, God removes the essence to sort of make way for created beings or lesser beings. You know what I mean? Like, that's almost like similar to Heidegger later on, in that being clears itself. Being is a clearing. It gives way to creation. But then again, it's very difficult because there's a very specific reason to why that in the Bible, why Job is persecuted as a test of faith. Whereas Jung, I mean, concluded that like there has to be a part of evil in God in order to fulfill a full presence of the Lord, like, which is
what was the reason that Job was?
But
what was the reason that Job was tested in the way that he was? And if God is God, wouldn't God know what exactly Job was going to do? I know this may be kind of a fedora take or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, that is. I mean, of course, he probably knew what he was going to do, but it's more so that even the most faithful can be challenged and actually persecuted and rise above those circumstances, because there is that old saying that God will only give you what you can tolerate. And so the most holy man can tolerate the most amount of persecution. His wife is killed.
Well, what about all the little kids that perish, with very painful diseases and all that? Like, would you be able to say that they could tolerate that? Like,
see, that's the problem. Oh, that's good that you mentioned that, Lev. It's good that you mentioned that. That's the problem with Jung's interpretation. That's the problem with a lot of Gnostic interpretation, because when you start to quantify the property of evil as being a part of God itself as rather a privation or an absence, then you start to get into this like kind of like fedora. Like, because let's face it, most atheists, like the Dawkins types, the four horse men of the the new atheists, right? The problem is that they have a very Protestant, like, literalist view where they verge into like, well, evil, of course, is like a divine, maybe it's a divine property too. Whereas in the Augustinian Catholic tradition and in Orthodoxy with John of Chrysostom and so forth that talk about this, it's not that evil is a necessity, but evil as privation makes sense for why a 9-year-old dies of leukemia. Because it's not the working of God, because to presuppose that evil also comes from God, that's kind of like, that just throws the whole schema of Christianity out of whack.
Well, that's kind of like the idea of God's left hand and right hand, which was very ancient very ancient idea, at least if we're talking about Old Testament times, of how they
but the
looked
New
upon.
Testament has perfected that view by saying that the left hand is not necessarily a property of the Lord, because that would lead the gateway into a lot of very heretical ways of I know, Lev, you don't believe it's heretical.
Well, I want to get to the guest of honor
sorry.
here. I want to get to Max. Max, you were a Christian before,
The
and
four
I'm
Bugmen
sure,
of the Soypocalypse.
and you've thought a lot about faith and what it means to you and evil and all that. So I'm curious what you think of what Gio was just talking about right now regarding it.
Well, I'm just curious, Jill, in regards to the nature of evil. Do you lean towards the belief of people like Augustine that evil
Yes.
is merely okay? Well, I got to say that in my experiences of evil, and particularly, Jung influenced my idea on this, that I do believe that evil in itself does have an existence. And I believe that the most powerful argument that Jung made in favor of this, I believe, was in chapter 5 of Ion, where he says that if you were to say that evil is the mere privation of good, how would you apply that to something like the realities of concentration camps, and saying that the actions that took place in there were just a mere privation of good?
I think the problem is the definition of privation. Like, it's that which separates you from the Lord, from the divinity of God. And so those actions would also be under that category of being a particularly harsh privation, in that even like Hannah Arendt in Origins of Totalitarianism said that if the sort of disenchantment that came after the Protestant Revolution, if that wasn't in place, then we wouldn't get the death camps in Auschwitz. And that's someone who is herself Jewish, right? And what people would consider like a lib. So I think that when you look at it, it was necessarily privation of the good that led to something like the modern, like, mechanized horror of the Holocaust and so forth. Because you really couldn't have that level of evil if it wasn't for the hubristic omnipotence of instrumental reason in the hands of man in order to come about. But I get what you're saying. I mean, it is very tempting to think of evil as an active force. And there is certain passages in the Bible where evil certainly is animated in some ways. But,
well, Satan as the adversary was not necessarily considered to be an element of privation originally. It was more like somebody who was working with Yahweh together in molding what ended up becoming the people of the Old Testament. And it still makes me think, though, there was this comment before on the chat that we had with Jonathan Peugeot and Uberboyo, where he was talking about, we don't live in the Milky Way galaxy or the universe, we live on Earth, we are the center of our story. It is a deeply modern concept that we can step outside of ourselves and analyze our own story. There are no other So this is the part that I could accept all that, but then he goes on to say, there are no other planets or alien species. That is all a figment of our imaginations here on Earth. Okay, so number one, alien species, I lean on there being them, but that's fine. There are no other planets? What? Okay, so this is where we're getting to this thing that I've encountered before, and Gio, I think you are also familiar with this in Christian Twitter, or the Christian people who comment here on the chat. I know who you are. Anyway, they talk about the whole space is fake thing, which... Yeah, which again, it's very, fine. If this is what we're accepting, then maybe you're right. I personally, even though I didn't take out my own telescope and look as deeply as I can into what is out there,
right,
I am leaning on the fact that no, space is not fake, that there are other planets out there. They're not just for the sake of decoration. And when it comes to experiences that we have here on Earth, you could say the same thing about... Well, first of all, there are multiple religions out there, polytheistic ones, I can't say it, whatever.
Polytheistic.
Thank you, Gio. As well as Islam, as well as Judaism, and the non-revealed religions, if we're talking about... I mean, Hinduism is sort of a revealed religion, too, in its own way. But
depending on which Hinduism.
Sure. But there are basically other points of view here as far as what is the ultimate truth and how it's going to end on Earth. So already, if we're talking about the planet Earth, we have disagreement over here. We can have different isolated pockets islands out there where people worship an animist type of religion. Well, the point that I'm getting to here, Gio, is that the people who are within those islands, let's say, I don't think they know exactly what is beyond whatever they're used to. Same thing with, let's say, in Sumeria, where there were leaders who referred to themselves as king of the world or king of the universe, despite only having a certain section of it. So this is why I really don't lean on this idea of the only thing that we actually have is this planet and there's nothing else to discover. I think it's a very reductive way of looking at the potential for what we have to experience. But Max, I'm curious your point of view when it comes to space, planets, when it comes to, is this all just an earthly experience and space is out there to test us?
I would say that space, if it's infinity, there has to be some form of extraterrestrial life beyond what is here. And I think that it will be like after we've exhausted all potential experiences for human beings on this planet, it's worthwhile trying to examine other galaxies to figure out whether or not it's possible to find ways of living life beyond our current terrestrial existence. I think it's worth it. I think it's worth trying to figure it out.
The only thing then that happens, at least for me, is that if we're talking about Christianity, let's say, and Jesus Christ, regardless of, let's say I accept everything that happened as far as the miracles, as far as the trials and tribulations, all that, we still have this idea that I brought up before with Peugeot. He did not really, wasn't really keen on talking about it that much other than dismissing what I had to say.
Oh, you're just upset that he just smacked you down.
Well, first of all, Gio, this is you going at the host here again, undermining me. But be that as it may, that is absolutely fine. You have every right to undermine me when it comes to this, because I believe in free speech. Anyway, what I'm getting to here is that if we are talking about Christianity, Jesus Christ existing on this planet, doing what he did, then was that a matter of instituting an end of I'm not going to say an end of time necessarily, but an end of the existence that people have had here, at the time of Revelation, where on this planet, everybody would undergo this great transformation, which again, Gio, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but nor do I want to put words in the New Testament's mouth, but that is what the New Testament says, that there's going to be a great transformation that's going to be in this entire planet. That's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if we have that, and then we also have the idea that there are other planets out there, we were talking before about this Solo, but I'm curious what Max thinks, then what does that make the transformation of this particular planet seem in comparison when there would be other planets with also intelligent life and people having similar dramas go on? And would there be separate revelations that they would have to undergo? But that means that it's got to be like Jesus's brother or something. That's going to be like other people who are going to be the avatars of the Almighty that are going to be instituting that. But then we can't really say that it's just the one Jesus Christ and that's it, can we? I don't know.
There's two ways I envision this. Let's go with the original assumption that there is a collective unconscious and that all of existence corresponds to archetypes, and that there are people on these other planets that have myths that differ in detail but are the same in pattern. Then I assume if that's the case, then maybe it's best to just worry about what's going on the planet right now. But then there's also the possibility that upon trying to transcend our current terrestrial existence and reach higher forms of consciousness, that those archetypes might take on new forms, and then the myths will change, and that we have to go upon completely different journeys that are incomprehensible to our current state of consciousness. Those are the two ways that I imagine it would take place. I can't really envisage any other way it would happen. But yeah, just generally speaking, regardless of whether or not any of these theories are correct, like whether or not Christianity is the right way or whether Jung's way is the right way, we just have to focus on where we are right now, improving our current states of being and our lot in life here on this planet. And then once that has taken place, then we can begin to look to the stars and find other ways of transcending our current condition.
That's well said. It's like that quote from A Clockwork Orange: "Man on the moon and men spinning around the earth, and there's not no attention paid to earthly law and order no more," if you remember that particular one. I agree there, but the reason why I even bring this up is not that I just want to get on a rocket ship right now and go to Mars like Elon Musk. It's just because I think we're at a point right now when there's so much information on the internet that there's people out there who want to cloister in particular bubbles and only get the information, like we talked about before with the Metal Gear Solid stuff, only get the information that they want to hear.
Yeah.
And that can potentially create in the future miniature or maybe major tyrannies where there would be maybe a lot of people within the much bigger bubble that whose dogma cannot be questioned. So what I basically want to try to do here is, and it doesn't mean that this is going to happen in a day, but I want to figure out, well, the truth. I want to figure out as much as I humanly can, being a human being, I think, figure out what exactly can we gain from all the different schools of thought, from all the different religions that make sense, while, again, from a human perspective, while at the same time making sure that we don't go into this very stringent dogma that prevents thinking outside the box, because see that as damaging.
Well, as Hatcher said, it's not that in apostolic Christianity that aliens can't exist. I mean, revelation can come for them too. Mm-hmm. It's that it's more so like when you're dealing with the claims of like creation. Like, for example, people are warring in the chat about so Cyber Ninja Zero asks if Job, like if God knew that Job was going to choose the right path, does that mean that free will is violated? I would say no, in that the sense that God is outside of being that we know, at least, and so the parameters of the Lord doesn't operate in the same way that in terms of our own, the material reality of our own free will as humans. It's more of that, it's not that there's predestination per se, is that the knowledge of God supersedes anything that we know as humans. Therefore, it's not being bound by that logic of, well, if you know something beforehand, that doesn't mean you have free will. That's another problem, is that we're ascribing our human category of, does knowledge of the fact beforehand violate the free will and expression or the instantiation of that act in the present? Not necessarily. Just because you have knowledge of someone fulfilling an act doesn't mean that God writes that, Job is going to act in a certain way, like the way that, the Calvinists believe. That would undermine our project of us being creative beings that are possessing of free will in order to act our role as being one with the image of God. So the whole Calvinist logic doesn't make sense to me. I mean, just the fact that God knows that Job is going to go down the right path doesn't mean that Job does not freely choose. It's not that people are the robots of God, and God is some AI programmer, some Silicon Valley nerd that takes what's that one drug they take in Silicon Valley nowadays, Lev?
Well, they take ayahuasca, and the ayahuasca.
Well, they microdose, but what's
microdosing LSD?
That productivity drug. What's it called?
Nootropic.
Wait, Qualia?
No, God. They take this nootropic nowadays. I forget what
I think you're talking about Qualia. I don't know.
No, it's basically like an amphetamine.
Interesting.
Yeah, I forget. The Silicon Valley. Yeah, but let's say it's not like some Silicon Valley nerd microdosing LSD. Modafinil. Yeah, that's what it is, Josh.
That's it, modafinil.
Is that a nootropic? What is that?
Yeah, it's a nootropic, yeah.
Does that actually work, or is it bullshit?
I've never had it.
I'm skeptical of nootropics. What if it gives you brain cancer in 10 years? I don't know. I don't know. Adrenochrome, that's what they take.
Yes, exactly, the adrenochrome. Good stuff. But no, I see what you mean, Gio. I still can't square away from myself the idea that then there would be multiple Jesuses that would go to different planets, but it would still be the same Jesus. That's I don't know. Rubs me really strange to think that it would still be Jesus. I could see it being an avatar of the same life force that is God coming down, but then like what was said in the very beginning of the stream, that there's Jesus and there's Buddha, and I know that you would differentiate between the two as far as what they exactly taught, but there is still this idea of somebody like Jesus going into the desert for a long time and meditating, and somebody like Buddha doing a similar thing, where it almost seems like if you do engage in certain spiritual practices over time, you end up coming to pretty similar states of consciousness. So in that way, like, why couldn't we say that if the earth was destroyed multiple times around, there wouldn't have been a Jesus during the
Well, even
antediluvian time or whatever? You know, like, why do we have to limit it to specifically being now and here? Because let's face it, Gio, one of the things that people do talk about, and this is again that question that I asked earlier, is it's going to be the end of reality itself as we know it. It's going to be the end of just like this whole existence, not just on planet Earth.
right.
I never saw it anywhere being just on planet Earth. It's going to be everywhere, but that's why I have the problem when I look up and see all these different planets and the idea of how many of them there are and how far it goes.
Well, like even in Buddhism, there is in the Flower Garland Sutra, there is the very mystical language of like the 10,000 Buddha lands and how Buddha nature like is instantiated throughout all of the Buddha lands in every sort of like cell of reality.
Yeah,
There
I
is
agree
Buddha
with that.
nature.
No,
So it's
we're on
ki-
the same page there. I agree with that. My only difference is that I'm not going to say that what happens here with Revelation on Earth, that's the be all end all of all existence. What I'm saying is that maybe something's going to happen, but other places will have similar things happening, which means to me, I wouldn't put personally full faith in any specific text that was passed down through other people. You know what I mean? Like that's my difference between me and you. I don't know, but Max, I'm curious, where do you place the Bible and all these particular dogmas that people have associated with the truth, like being somebody who was Christian before? Where do you place it currently right now in your life?
I would say the same thing that's Uberboyo said when he was just here. I would say that they're a lot like the archetypes in that they are human beings trying to use human language to describe the nature of the divine. And we take all these different dogmas, all these different religions, try to suss out the patterns that are common across all of them, and then try to create new dogma from them. And I think, Gio, you said earlier on that you believe kind of the same way that Edward Edinger believed, the famous Jungian scholar, that in the coming generations, it's going to be sort of a more Jungian era where we are attempting to do that, where we are attempting to find a new dogma that is closer approximation of the metaphysical reality, where we're trying to instantiate the soul of religion, but also trying to work in conjunction with human categories like reason,
yeah, I forgot about
rationality.
Edgar.
Yeah, I think that that's where it is, and I think that in regards to the religious texts that we have now, like the Bible, like the Upanishads, like whatever, there are truths latent in those texts, but they need to take on a new skin, sort of like the snake that sheds their own skin to make way for the new. That's the way I see it.
I mean that makes sense. I think that I mean, even like the use of reason is going to have, I think, hopefully, a huge emporium in the future. Although that won't happen because people. I mean, let's face it. We're in a moment in history where we're in the winter. We're in the
Dark winter.
yeah, where people like. I mean, even the Kali Yuga, like there is the weightedness of matter. Like people view things through a material lens because we can't really see. I'm just thinking maybe Max, you should do video games in relation to Spangler. That'd be interesting.
In relation
Although
to
you
what?
would get like a totally different audience to tell the truth.
What is that? What is it called?
If you know Spangler's Decline and Fall of the West,
Oh, yes.
you could do like, I wonder what video game would fit into that category. I wonder maybe like you could I guarantee you someone like you could come up with some like wild interesting content about video games and Decline and Fall of the West. I wonder, like,
I wouldn't
Yeah.
want there to be a game that would be made with the mindset of making a based and trad-pilled game, because it's going to be another version of Poso, that comic I showed you. Maybe
wasn't that
not
kind
the
of based in
conservative
trad-pilled
version.
games? Like, I don't know.
No, but I don't think they come about through somebody sitting down and thinking, I'm going to make a based and red-pilled game. You know, like, I think this is goes back to what we talked about earlier. I think that actual, like, substantial creativity, it's like Kurosawa said, like, if I wanted to make a statement, I would have written it down instead of making a movie. So I think
that
like,
was what I said with
yeah.
Lord McIntyre a few weeks ago, is that the problem is that you can't have, like, the problem with, like, people on the right thinking that, like, oh, I'm just going to make a based in red-pilled Wolfenstein. But no, actually, Wolfenstein isn't a condemnation. It's actually, like, an affirmation of, like, you know...
Or just like Starship Troopers.
Yeah, well, that's different because I truly believe Heinlein was, like, the last great sci-fi writer, because sci-fi writing is such trash nowadays. I said that the problem with, like, people on the right is that they basically think the same as Walter Benjamin. They think that the politicization of art is going to lead the way into the future, and that's not true. Like, that's just going to murder the ritualism and the cultural context of the way art arises more than anything. So you could create, like, you know, well, Castle Wolfenstein, but it's good. You know, it's like not this cringy bullshit where, like, the Nazi rednecks take over, like the fucking Aryan Brotherhood takes over America or something like that. It's
Well, I think that the
sort of
Japanese,
stupid.
I think that the Japanese in general, I could be wrong, but I think that they are less political. Like, they don't really focus
they
that
don't
much
have
on
the same-
politics, and that's why I think we are able to have, even from somebody whose games, like, you would agree with me, Max, that Hideo Kojima does have a lot of political intrigue within the games, but I don't think it comes from a place of choosing a side and vouching for that particular side against the
What
other
games
side.
did Kojima do again? I'm not.
So Metal Gear Solid,
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
yeah,
he created...
yeah, and he did recently that
That's
game.
Stranding.
Yeah, Death Stranding. Thank you.
I hear that was a good game.
Yeah,
Death
it's
Stranding.
predicted what we're in right now in a way. But getting back to what I'm talking about. Oh, and by the way, for all the people out there who are new to this, who are saying that, Lev, you're a materialist, keep in mind that I am the kind of person who actually thinks that all of this is imagination, that we are in God's imagination, and that there's a lot more credence to the idea of existing within the realms of thought, which eventually solidify into matter. So if that still means that I'm a materialist according to your standards, there's nothing that I can do, but I just
I think
wanted
they
to
mean
get that out.
because you're thinking in terms of, like, the material, like, species on different planets have to, like...
Well,
realize the
first
same thing at
of all,
once.
those species, I would say they don't even have to be on physical planets. They can be on mental planets. They could be on planets, let's say, if there are, like,
Listen,
planets
don't
on a
marry
different
different
dimension.
species, okay? Do not...
Think of all the furry art that we'll get when we find... Okay, never mind. Anyway, what I want to... Oh, yes. Well, actually,
I wanted
I'm
to talk
curious,
about
Max.
Apocalypse Now. Let's change gear.
Hold on,
Sorry.
Gio. Before we get to Apocalypse Now, the second to last thing that I wanted to ask Max is the furries, because I noticed you did a bit of a groan here. I don't know if you know this or not. I don't know if you... By the way, everybody subscribe, patreon.com/breaktherules. I don't know if you know this or not, Max, but we had a furry stream way, way, way back, ancient history now, but this was like last year, where we had this guy who was incredibly sensitive. I had to wear kid gloves to talk with this guy, and the moment that there was somebody on stream who said, you know, without any anger, he just said, like, he happens to be anti-fur. Like, the moment that he said that, that was enough. That was it. The guy went off the stream. He started going on this giant tirade against Break the Rules, how
On
he wanted
Twitter.
to... Yes, how he wanted to grift off his audience and all this.
Yeah, like we want them. The fuck?
Yes. So anyway, I'm just curious, like, Max, in your experience, I would say that all the people who are watching this, who are coming in from Max's audience, I really appreciate the heaven out of you, because I just noticed, Max, your energy, just your yellow glow, whatever you want to say here, it is something that I think is crucially lacking in a lot of internet communities, and I definitely think from from what I got from you here today on this stream, that you have an amazing audience. And I am curious, though, if you have encountered furries and what your experience has been with them. Maybe you got the best furries. Maybe you got furries that were...
Might as well just ask him who Chris Chan is. Might as well at this point.
No, that's already old news. No,
Man, everybody is so desperate to know my opinion on Chris Chan. It's just because of the whole autism thing. Look, I just no comment. Okay, look, please, let's just find better representatives for people that have autism. Thank you very much.
We had shameless multiple-hour streams on the symbology of Chris Chan. Sorry, go.
Yeah.
I would just say, in regards to furries, I'm sure that I have tons of. I'm sure there are people in my audience that are. As far as personal interactions with them, I only ever knew one. I knew him. I think we stopped talking, like not for any particular reason. It's just natural happenstance. About 5 years ago, and aside from the fact that he was a furry, just seemed like a normal guy. That's all. Just talked to him, but yeah, I'm not particularly involved or know much about that aside from the things that everybody talks about in regards to furries.
I mean, God bless everyone. I don't really care in particular when it comes to those kind of things. My only issue is, again, it seems like people group themselves into these smaller bubbles, and there seems to be a lack of curiosity when you finally group yourself into this bubble. Like, you're only pretty much interested in just whatever is happening within it, and when it comes to furries or people who are, like a lot of brightly colored animation, my concern there is that much like, let's say we have, for example, let's say we have the Iranian flag, which, I don't know, this was Giorgiani's take, I don't know if it's right, but it talked about, like, the three colors is, like, supposed to represent, like, the farmers, the warriors, and the aristocracy. Like, there's a mythology behind even simple color coding, but today, when you would have, let's say, and again, like, much love to anybody, I don't really care as far as sexual preference and all of that, God bless you, that's all great, but when we have, like, the symbols right now, there was a recent pride flag that I'm sure you've seen that came out. It has like those triangles on it now. And it's just like, there's these colors that represent one's identity that in a way, like, if people enjoy it, that's nice. My only concern is that there doesn't seem to be that much of a stretch of mythology unless you were to go all the way into talking about, the unification of the gender into like the whole, but that's again like a very esoteric idea.
Like a Bria Dottie, Donna Haraway post-gender cyborg feminist type.
Yeah, like unless you're going that direction, then my only concern, especially for a lot of Zoomers, especially for a lot of young people, is that they're stuck in a very narrow place where there doesn't seem to be much curiosity above the hashtags and the genders and all that. Like, there doesn't seem to be as much of a thirst for knowledge beyond it.
Yeah, well, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, like, if there's something that could be...
We're seeing very ancient... Sorry, go ahead, Lev.
No, I agree with you. These things are ancient to a certain extent. Like, there's, maybe tribal things you could say.
Some
or like,
animism there, I guess.
Yeah, but it's like, I'm not just saying it for the sake of, now we're going to sulk about it. What I would want to do, this is just more of a declarative statement here, is that I would want to, through the process of doing the show BTR, because I want to go on TikTok as well, I want to figure out a way to break people free from the bubbles that they are in, not in a disrespectful way, not in a way like, own the libs, and all that stuff, because all that stuff, it just makes the bubble that much more impenetrable. Yeah. It makes people that much more on the defensive.
I think, like, the problem, I think what you're getting at, Lev, and I want to hear Max's opinion on this, is that, well, that first stream wasn't a total disaster. We did have a good conversation with, like, one of the oldest furries, what's his name, Joe?
Furries on Earth, Joe Strike.
Joe Strike wrote the literal book about the fur nation.
Shout out to Joe Strike. I'm going to put an image of him in the lizard suit now.
We had a good conversation, and he wasn't, like, in the first furry con. He was, like, at the second furry con, back in, like, because furries are much older than people think. It's a total mindfuck. I remember one time me and my friends... we were watching, like, back when cringe videos were a thing, and there was, like, this camcorder video from the 1990s where it was like this furry like with a tail like wigging out in a convenience store, and this like black shop owner's like, look at that dude, look at his tail, he's wiggling his tail now. And this was like in 1999. But apparently furries have been around from the 70s onwards. So no, but we were talking about like how the furries, like the problems of people like, you know, and everyone does this. It's like they're cringe, you know, they're involved with a lot of like far left politics, blah, blah, blah. I think the problem is that we don't take the time to understand why we're seeing such a stark quest to release ourselves from the human, whether it's very academic theory, cell post-humanist theories, like, I mentioned like Briodotti and Donna Haraway, or if it's just simply like being having a fursona and being what's the real hardcore animist thing that they call themselves? Otherkin. Yeah, like that. To me, I think we have to question why our particular epoch, our particular episteme values the escape or the flight from the human into something extra or something superhuman. I think like that enough attention isn't paid to that, as opposed to saying like these people are freaks. I mean, they're freaks, obviously, but like that, I mean, yeah.
I mean, we all have freakish tendencies, I think, in our own little ways. So I'm not going to pick on the furries here, particular. I mean, I just feel like a lot of the people who are going into a lot of these alternative things today, back in the day, you know, they would have. I know, maybe they would have been like the eccentric person in their village, but then again, part of me thinks no. I think that they may have just been like an average person tilling the soil, working on the land, whose mind was not, I don't know if infected is the right word here, you know, because again, I think Rouge the Bat is sexy. There, I said it. Does that, yeah.
Was furry stuff big in Weimar? They actually did have animist like parties in Weimar, Germany, where they dress up in wolf skins and have orgies.
I know.
Actually,
Max, are you a Sonic fan?
Oh,
actually, I only ever played Sonic Adventure DX, and that was when I was 10.
Okay, that doesn't have Rouge the Bat.
Well, Metal
in
Gear
it, so.
Solid is to you, Sonic is to Lev. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I did a whole here. I'm gonna link it right now.
Don't.
Yes.
No.
This is important.
God.
Gio, what do you think I'm gonna do? Because I think you may be confused. What do you think I'm about to post?
This is the next Max video right here. That thread.
Yes. Okay, so here we go. So I did a whole thread on Twitter about the Zoroastrian connections with Sonic the Hedgehog. So I noticed that the image over here of Sonic the Hedgehog, you see over here, it has like him pointing the finger up and the wings over here and that little banner. So if you look at the symbol over here of Ahura Mazda, what do you notice? You notice that
you should have put the red circle around it.
Pointing, fine, whatever. It's pointing. It's pointing up. It's got the wings. It's got the ring. It's even has like those two tails. You know, it has like similar to what's going on with that little thing on Sonic. And here you can see.
Did the Zoroastrians worship speed?
From the Sonic, well, hedgehogs are considered to be a sacred animal for the Zoroastrians as well. So that is, yeah.
You know what, Lev? I'm not going to poo-poo on that idea, because there is, based on the little bit that I do know about Sonic the Hedgehog, there is a lot of religious symbolism that is going on behind the scenes. For example, in the aforementioned Sonic Adventure DX, there's a character known as Chaos, from what I understand, and he takes on a whole bunch of different forms, sort of like the primordial chaos of like alchemical tradition. You know, it's like all these different forms that it can take within like this infinite darkness, and that's sort of what chaos represents. He can be like this huge monster, he can be like this humanoid, and switch between all this sort of different stuff. So there might be something there.
And also the Chaos Emeralds are like the because there are seven of them since Sonic 2, so the Chaos Emeralds are like the 7 chakras.
Yep.
And Sonic eventually reaches enlightenment. He becomes supersonic. Much like when you go through the process of activating your Kundalini, a similar thing ends up happening. Another thing I noticed over here, this is part of the Sonic 1 game. There was this bonus level when you get 50 rings. It was set up in this way.
Oh my god!
You notice?
Holy fuck!
Break.
Oh my god, that just hit me like a ton of bricks.
No,
Holy
I'm telling
fuck.
you, this stuff is all over the place.
Oh.
And
Every art hoe has to have that poster and the poster of Starry Night in her dorm room, by the way, when she goes to art
yes,
school.
and over here, notice that the grid pattern that Sonic has over here, it's very similar. And also, if you pay attention to the goalposts over here, so so you see like the Freemason goalposts over here, like those two poles with the spheres. That's just like the goalposts. I don't know why I don't have the image over here.
Wasn't the room in 2001 had the same Freemasonic grid pattern?
Yeah.
Oh god.
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
Well, it's like the checkpoints. I don't know why I don't have that image here, but if I search Sonic checkpoint, everybody subscribe, by the way, during this gap of time to break the rules. I know you're watching it. I know you are loving the heaven out of what we are doing here, so please subscribe. Anyway, over here,
You really
look.
can't understand Sonic unless you read Paul Virilio, Speed and Politics. That's my hot take. I will not explain.
Maybe. I mean, see over here, this is the goalpost.
Lev, you should read Speed
Isn't
and
this-
Politics to truly understand
I definitely shall. I
Sonic
definitely
you.
shall. So you see over here the goalposts and the Freemason
Yeah,
sign?
yeah.
Same thing. See, this is what I'm talking. This is what I'm talking about, everybody. This is how it all.
The best
relates.
part, Max, is we had a Sonic stream where we had the singer that did the soundtrack to Sonic Red, and Lev
No,
totally
Sonic R.
Sorry, totally like subjected her to like this red, and she was like in shock the whole time, and it was just like such a. And the best comment I think came from I think it was Super Iron Bob. Like, you basically like brought this poor woman on to subject her to this autism. Like, what the fuck is that, Lev? No, is that Indra's Palace?
No, it's the rainbow body from Buddhism. So when Sonic the Hedgehog gets the Super Emeralds, which they had to do because for the Sega Genesis, it wasn't enough space, so they had to make a separate game called Sonic and Knuckles after Sonic 3, but they used the lock-on technology to turn it into one game. But anyway, you get the Super Emeralds after you get the Chaos Emeralds, and you turn Sonic not into Super Sonic now, but into Hyper Sonic, who's all like rainbow colored, like the colors just mix around. So I compare that to the rainbow body that is found in Buddhism. Yeah. Okay. So there we go. I mean, this is like an endless hole.
That's almost like oh god. Yeah. Now I understand, like, there was this one article by Sam Christ before he got canceled and left Twitter. And as much as he's like a Chapo leftoid, I think he's probably a great writer. He wrote this thing about Heidegger and GTA. Like, for example, how the engine of Grand Theft Auto, they discovered that if you have a delayed load sequence where you could like still use the same disk space, but like the game will load based on like a referent, which is usually like the character or a car. Like the game will load in sequence to where you're going, like instead of the full game being present all the time. Mm. He said that like Heidegger's theory of the clearing or aletheia is similar in that being will clear the way towards like truth, or like being itself is a clearing of sorts. It was like this really weird theory cell way of you should read that, but I should link that article. It was like Heidegger and GTA.
I would definitely love to take a look. Oh, wait, one final thing, by the way, related to Zoroastrianism as well as Dr. Robotnik. So you see over here, I'm going to spotlight. So in Zoroastrianism, the universe will go through 3 eras. Creation, the present world where the creation is under attack, and the final state when Septimainu will dominate and Ahura Mazda prevail. All the universe will revert to its pure state. The souls trapped in darkness will be released. So if you know anything about Sonic the Hedgehog, you have these poor little animals, these little defenseless animals that get stuck inside of the robots. And in a way, I see that as being an analogy to what may be happening with a lot of people who have not developed their consciousness enough in the years to come, because they are going to be stuck inside of this, like we talked about with Uberboyo, in this roboticized mindset, and they are not going to be able to escape that. And so I think what people can do who get to a higher level of consciousness is help people escape that roboticization as much as possible. And even Dr. Robotnik, he is called Eggman for a reason. Eggman, ego man, he is trapped within his own ego, and that is why he keeps doing what he's doing in a way to try to control reality and constrain it to his will of this transhumanist roboticization. But that's all I wanted to say about Sonic. That's the end for me, Charlie.
What's
You
there
guys
to
are blowing
say?
my fucking mind. That is actually quite fascinating. I need you to do like a guest spot on my channel where you talk about Sonic, because I do have a lot of people, just
Shit.
like just asking me to cover it, saying like there's all this stuff. I didn't realize there was this much stuff to this extent.
I would, dude, I would love to, and I would also love to talk about Nights into Dreams. We don't have time now, but later on, like Nights into Dreams was made by Sonic Team, the same people who made Sonic, and they read tons of Carl Jung before making this game.
Well, of course they did.
Yes, it's a very Jungian game. And in fact, the avatar of Wiseman is what I have in our Discord. Speaking of which, all the people who are enjoying this right now and thinking, how can I have more of an interaction with these fine people from Break the Rules? Not only am I going to subscribe, but I am so thirsty to talk with Lev about art because I'm going to be doing some live drawing there on Discord. Here's the Discord link.
It seems
right
like you're going
here.
to groom them on Discord.
Go
Live.
there. I am going to groom all the people who come in into the very best people they could possibly be. That is the good kind of grooming that Lev is going to provide free of charge for anybody who becomes a patron of Break the Rules, for the people who go on Discord. And by the way, when you become a patron of Break the Rules, you are going to get the super secret places on Discord where the grooming actually happens. So become a $5 patron, patreon.com/breaktherules. $20 patrons is going to give you a beautiful magnet. Look at this. Look at this. Max, are you a fan of moths?
Oh yeah, sure.
Great, because this moth over here, my father created this. This is a beautiful moth. Thank you for Brittany Venti, because she was the reason why this moth was created in the first place. Any Brittany Venti fans out there that want to get your hands on this beautiful moth? Oh, by the way, see the spreading of the wings? That's another symbol of enlightenment. But anyway, we're not going to get into that right now. Anyway, when you become a $20 patron, you are going to get a wooden magnet, but it's going to be either a random magnet, or if you want the moth, ask for the moth. If you want definitely legit, ask for definitely legit. For those who know, you know. Anyway, when you become a $30 patron, you are going to get an exquisite, beautiful print from Giovanni Pennacchietti. Here you could see the print. No, that's not it. Hold on. Patreon print. Here we go. You are going to see a beautiful, you are going to get, not see, you're going to see it too, but you're going to get a beautiful print from the great Giovanni Pennacchietti. Watch him go from the TFW No GF series. When you become a $50 patron, you are going to get all of the above, ladies and gentlemen, but that is not all. You are going to get a commissioned... What the fuck is that?
I never got that out of my mind the whole time, the
no.
chaos estrogens.
Oh, no. You are going to get a commissioned... a commissioned wooden magnet of your choice. My father is going to make it for you within reason. Please be reasonable, ladies and gentlemen. But you are going to get that. You are going to get a beautiful Warhammer 40k figure painted by Jules P. Hamilton. You are going to get another painting from Gio Pennacchietti from the Bob Ross School. And you are also going to get, upon request, any of the thumbnails that my father creates. You'll get a print of that, but you got to request that. We're not going to do that up front. Anyway, you are going to get all that plus episodes that we happen to do sometimes. That's for patrons only. MP3s of the Patreon episodes. MP3s of all the episodes that come out. I know I'm kind of late on this one. I'm going to do it after I eat today.
Yeah, $5 level will get you all that too. Access to special episodes, which we have to make more of, Lev. Maybe it's just you and me.
We're definitely going to do that. And look, I wish I could give you guys this chocolate because it's really good, but unfortunately that's the one thing that I cannot give you. But what I can give you is my thanks for watching this, for being a part of this. Let us go to the final questions as I post the link to the Patreon.
Final question.
You will get that final question, but also we are on Odyssey. We are on DLive. We are on Twitch. We are live streaming.
I don't know how we're still on
Yes,
Twitch.
we're still on Twitch. Twitch.com/breaktherules3. This is our Twitch account right over here, and we are on DLive as well. We are streaming on all these platforms, and you guys just keep ignoring it. Don't ignore DLive. Don't ignore Odyssey. Odyssey is great, and I'm thankful to be on Odyssey. In fact, it is odyssey.com/break the rules, and like two things and an F. So this is the link to Odyssey. We are on Spotify. We are on Apple. We are everywhere because we gotta be everywhere. That is how we fight against the algorithm. That is how we win at the end of the day. BTR is going to be unstoppable thanks to amazing people that we have on the show, like Max, like Gio, like Uberboyo, like Hotep Jesus, like all the amazing people that we've had on the show, like Styx Hexenhammer 666, who is coming back next week on the 7th for the back to school special with Paul Rossi, who was the teacher that got kicked out of Grace School for opposing CRT. Anyway, we are going to get to your question, Gio, right now. Also, just the link. I'm pasting the Patreon link in there for all the people who want to become a patron. We just got a $50 patron Saturday. Isn't that amazing? So there we go.
Great, I'm gonna have
become
to pay
a
for
patron
shipping again.
Become a patron. Become a patron. Become a patron. Anyway, Gio, your question. Go.
Oh, also go to my YouTube channel, Jenner
Hell
Productions.
Yeah. Heavens yeah.
I just released yesterday a video where I critique this artsy article, the top Zoomer artists. It's not as vicious as people would think. I'm pretty fair. And the second part will be coming out tomorrow, where I critique these art statements by these MFA graduates. So yeah, that's my YouTube channel. But I wanted to ask about, originally I wanted to talk about Apocalypse Now, but my brain is like totally fried right now. And Max is going to come again, when are you scheduling that, Lev? Maybe October?
Well, oh, yes, October 9th. Max, I would definitely love for you to come back. I think we've only scratched the surface, and I am incredibly thankful for you coming in.
But I wanted to ask you, this is a very popular topic. There's a number of videos that have gotten millions of views. What is your opinion on the exact date or episode or event that happened that totally destroyed The Simpsons, that transitioned from the classics, the people, first 9 seasons, to this like zombie Simpsons monstrosity we have today? Some people say it's the Frank Grimes episode. Other people say it's the Skinner episode, the Armin Tanzarian one. I don't know. Like, I have a few theories, but from your opinion, we're both lifelong Simpsons fans. What is your opinion on the decline and fall of the Simpsons empire?
Well, I'll just tell you the season that I stopped watching it, I just noticed that there seemed to be a lot less effort being put into it. It was around the time the 17th season was airing. I just remember watching it as a kid and realizing, there's not really... I used to watch it every single night when it was on Saturdays at 8 p.m. on Fox. And it was just in the middle of that season. I don't know why. It just seemed like that was the moment where they just stopped trying. It wasn't as witty as it used to be. And I mean, like, obviously that decline was there all the way through like the 14th, 15th, and 16th, but there's something about the 17th season that made that happen. Now, people say that, things like the Frank Grimes episode, I thought that was a great episode. I don't know what people are talking about. I think that was one of the more profound episodes that The Simpsons ever put out. Some other people say that it was this episode featuring Lady Gaga, which I never saw.
That was before. That was the cenotaph after the funeral, in my opinion.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so I don't know.
What about the one with AOC and the squad?
Wait, there's
really?
Oh, I forgot about that one.
Are you serious? Is that actually a thing?
Yes, apparently Bart becomes a male feminist to attract a girl. There was one episode of that.
No, well, this one was one where Donald Trump had a bad dream, had a nightmare where he had like this musical number with people of the squad coming in. So here is a screenshot. I'm surprised, Max, you haven't seen this.
They had the one where they list the supposed crimes or whatever of Trump. That was another one. Wow, I mean, they're pretty charitable to AOC screaming face, but I think the problem is that, like a lot of people say, when The Simpsons started to not critique pop culture, but became just another facet of it, I think that was,
Yeah, it wasn't so much just satirical, poking fun at everybody, making a stereotype out of everybody. It sort of just became more of a platform for people to put forward their own particular agendas, as we see with a lot of different forms of fiction. Yeah, but
Do you remember the specific episode from season 17? Because I mean, yeah, this came out in 2005, and I'm like looking at. I usually gauge a season by the Treehouse of Horror episode, and this is the AI one.
let me just. Oh, yeah, I think what it was it was the one where it was sort of a parody of My Fair Lady, but it was with Groundskeeper Willie.
My Fair
And
Laddie.
My
That
Fair
was
Laddie.
the
Yeah. And I just remembered this isn't that great. It seems like they're just trying to do what Family Guy is doing because that was the popular thing at the time and just try to turn everything into a musical number. And I just
Oh
didn't find it.
God, yeah.
Yeah. And I just didn't find it very clever. I just thought they're just pandering. It doesn't feel like The Simpsons right now. So I just stopped watching it.
There was the one where like Lisa pretends like gender swaps to go to the boys' class, which is like this brutal, logical. Like yeah, like it seems that season 17, there was a lot of episodes like they introduced the whole backstory of Bob and his Italian wife. And it's
Yeah.
just like I don't know. It's
Well, what about much earlier with Armin Tamzarian, with Principal Skinner's old life being revealed? Like some people would argue
Yeah.
that was kind of like the beginning of the end, but is that not giving it enough credit?
It's sort of that I could understand why people were making that argument because it was then that they're sort of messing with how do I say this? It sort of deals with the same problem where it's like, oh, you had this origin story for Bart, Lisa, and Maggie and how they were born and what Homer and Marge had to go through. And then they did this whole other thing in like a later season that I heard about where Homer had like this rock band that they called Sadgasm and he's like Kurt Cobain.
yeah, he's like Kurt Cobain.
Yeah. And then it's
He gets
just
cucked by a college professor.
yeah, exactly. And then it's just when you start doing stuff like that, it doesn't really seem like these characters they're just I don't know how to explain it.
They're just puppets of flesh.
Yeah. They're
just
they're like canvases that you can project anything onto, and they don't really have anything to them anymore. Like the one thing that Homer was, sorry to interrupt you, man, but in regards to Homer, the reason why he was so beloved to a lot of people was that even though he was sort of like the average American who wasn't particularly all there in the brain, at least he was an honorable person in that he cared for his family and tried to do his best, even when it was to the severe detriment of his own health. But then as the seasons went on, you just realize, oh, well, they're just trying to push the boundaries as far as, how stupid can we make Homer act? And it seemed like at numerous times in the seasons that I haven't watched that they sort of jumped the shark in that regard. Right.
There wasn't that level of sacrifice. Like, for example, the Leftorium episode where Homer like is plagued by his conscience, or like the even the backstory of like how they had Bart and how he had to like sacrifice and like give away his dream job. Like as much as I detest the guy, Jacob Geller did have a good video about that one guest animation where like it's in like thousands of years in the future, and then the Simpsons just become like these entities plagued by memories that don't make sense. They're sort of like these. It was a good video. I mean, as much as I, anyways, I think that it is true when you just become a template or a canvas for like any sort of whatever's happening within like the current like milieu of culture, where then Simpsons becomes like the soundboard of like whatever's happening. Yeah. Like I think that's like a terrible loss of like, it's to the point where it's like they should have ended like literally a decade or so ago. There's no point to it anymore. Like the whole, I think what the people, they blame that episode with Skinner is that you're taking like a beloved character and you're sort of like putting a layer of doubt over the whole thing. Like even like you mentioned how like Sadgasm, he had this grunge band, but like what was like before what was Homer doing in the classic seasons. He was touring with Smashing Pumpkins.
He
as
was
a
going
freak
to
show.
space.
Yeah, and Lollapalooza, or going to space. Yeah, so it's like, or like, you know.
Although going to space is actually a little bit more realistic towards things that people would actually think about, like, what if I went to space, as opposed to having a celebrity go in there and touring with them. It seems much more ham-fisted to do something like that than it would be to just go to space. But yeah, when it comes to both Sonic and Simpsons, I think a lot of meme culture has been milking the Jule of the fallenness of, like, Sonic was supposed to be like cool and hip, and, you know, like back in the day that was supposed to be like the differentiation between Sonic and Mario. But now Sonic has become in a way a living meme. Anyway, we can get into that a little bit later. Let's see if I have a final question. I mean, I'm just really, really thankful that we got to do this today, Max, and really love your energy. And yes.
But to make a Jungian point, like in that video, or I think it was Emplemon's video, about how remix culture has like created this like hauntology of The Simpsons, and to bring it into a Jungian thing, it's almost like the archetype of culture that is created by us. Now it becomes its own universe. It becomes its own unconscious being that's lived in various like Instagram accounts, and like, you know, shout out to Dark Simpsons, that one YouTuber. It's like it becomes a strange sort of longing within the millennial psyche. It's very much like the Mark Fisher, you know, the future's canceled, we just have the remnants of the past as possibilities. Sort of that like weird sad boy Marxist type of thinking. But it's true, you know. Oh my God, look at this.
No matter how fast I run, I cannot run away from the pain.
Oh my God. Terrible.
And with that, guys, we are going to go. I just again want to thank Max so much for doing this. We are going to have not next week. We're going to have this Thursday, the Afghanistan stream. We are going to have this with Balding. He is joining us of Balding's World. We are going to have Huntsman and the Prudentialist. They are coming in, talking about Afghanistan, what is going on there. I mean, we've just left right now, so let's see what the next couple of days are going to bring as far as news. But either way, there's definitely a lot to talk about there. And like I mentioned before, we're going to have a stream with Styx, Hexenhammer 666, and Paul Rossi coming in next Tuesday. Here it is. Look what my father drew. He drew this roller coaster that Styx is on in the Hawaiian shirt, like a cat roller coaster, and there's spoons sitting inside of that roller coaster. So you have that to look forward to. And by the way, Gio, this is the first time you're going to hear this, and I just got confirmation like an hour ago. We are going to have Thursday, October 7th, Styx versus Joel Davis.
Oh my God. That's gonna be madness. What are they gonna talk about? He's my friend of mine. He's a YouTuber.
So Joel Davis is a lot more, let's say, and he says so himself, like more authoritarian-minded as far as systems of government goes, as well as converted recently to Christianity. So Styx would be against both. So it would be a very interesting conversation that I'm looking forward to. Both of them have already confirmed. I only say these things when both have confirmed. So here we go.
Oh, man.
All right.
We had a super chat asking Max a question, if you recall.
Yes, I am going to do that right now. Super chats, that is the final thing we're going to do. Again, everybody subscribe, patreon.com/breaktherules. Go and give us 5 stars on Apple. I'm going to send the Apple link as well. Here is the super chat. From Genres and Generations, $2. Thank you so much, Genres and Generations. You are a newcomer here. I knew you came from Max. I really appreciate you being here, brother. Anyway, Max, Genres asks, Max, next Deus Ex video, when? When, Max? When?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like, a lot of people recently have been telling me how much they appreciate those videos as compared to when I actually first released them. That's good. It just depends on what exactly it is that people want me to talk about in regards to Deus Ex. I thought I did a pretty thorough investigation in regards to the first game with my first Deus Ex video, and then there was the other most profound moment in gaming history, which I linked to the conversation that JC Denton has with Morpheus in the first game. The only thing that I think I could really talk about in regards to that game is sort of the conspiracies and their relation to real life, but that would just be a whole can of worms that I'm not sure I want to open up in regards to my channel. But I will say this: when I get around to playing Deus Ex Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, I'm sure that there will be something there where I can sort of extract the commonalities across all those three games, and the philosophy and the vision of the future that it provides that might be good for my channel. But I still have yet to play those games. But if you have any suggestions about what you'd like me to talk about in regards to Deus Ex, just feel free to tweet them at me or email me, maxderrat, all one word, at yahoo.ca.
Excellent. Wait, without doxing yourself, you don't have to say this, but if you want to, where in Canada are you?
Oh, I'm in the province of Ontario.
Oh, same.
Oh,
yeah,
you are too?
Yeah, holy
Nice.
shit. I was listening to one of your videos and you said you had I'm like, he's probably a fellow Leaf. Yeah, I live like 10 minutes away from Niagara Falls, pretty much.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I won't say where I live now. I'll say that where I used to live a few months ago was around the Greater Toronto area, about 40 minutes away from the heart of it. But yeah,
Oh yeah.
not there.
And the Genres and Generations also says, don't forget Invisible War.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess we do have to consider that canon, even though it wasn't the best received game. But yeah, there was the whole thing with Denton that I could probably talk about in regards to that. Thanks for the recommendation.
Excellent. And with that, guys, we are going to go. Let's see if there was one final thing I want to say. Well, follow Max Derrat on Twitter, twitter.com/MAXDERRAT. If you want to follow me for my dreams, my artwork, which again, I am working on crypto art, guys, like crazy right now. There is a bottleneck because this one big image, Geo, you know, the one that I've been doing on the left stream, it just takes a long time to do because I'm also doing all the little characters that are like their own cards afterwards. But anyway, follow me, twitter.com/LevPo, LEVPO. Go there, and also youtube.com/Lev Polyakov. That's my name. Don't wear it out. Watch my animations. I have a lot of great animations there that I highly recommend you guys take a look at. And I'm going to be doing a lot more animations as BTR grows, as I'm going to have to do less stuff in the back end. Because pretty much everything that you see in BTR, like what ends up happening, that is all me waking up very early in the morning. Like I wake up at 4 a.m. now sometimes and do it. So if you want there to be less things on my plate, consider becoming a patron once again, patreon.com/breaktherules, so that this whole thing can grow like nobody's business. Anyway, guys, this is the very end of the stream. I appreciate everybody and everyone, including all the Jin who are watching this stream.
Oh yeah, and go to my
the
Twitter.
Astral Play. Twitter.com/GiantGeo.
There you could find my link tree, my YouTube channel, my Instagram where I post my art, stuff like that.
Beautiful. All right, guys, this is and of course, if you are not following Max Derrat on YouTube, I don't know what you are doing with your life. I gotta say, Max, your channel is very addictive. And I mean that in a good way. This is the kind of drug you want to be addicted to. So follow Max on YouTube over here. And guys, this is it. This is the end of the stream. Take care, everybody. Hold on. I am searching for the actual thing that I have to click on because that's the way it works.